Everybody on?
Yes, I will read out who is here. And then once I do that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to pass off the meeting to Keisha Morris-Perkins, who will be running the behind the scenes portion of today's meeting.
Yes.
Technical issues notwithstanding. So we do have Vice Chair Molina, Director Costa, Secretary Burke, Director Gilmore on, and then we do also have some alternates on this morning, which is always good to see. Mayor Wilcox is here, and Jody Gonzalez. And then we do have some of our non-voting board members, including Tom Winterburn, Mark Miller, Connie White, and I believe Denny Franklin has also signed on. So that is who is on the call this morning. So we do have a quorum. And with that, I will pass the meeting duties over to Keisha and the chair. Thank you.
All right. Well, we do have a quorum. Are we ready to proceed? Okay. All right. I will call this board of directors meeting for DCTA to order. It's April 22nd, 2021. It's about 10:01 a.m. Our next item on the agenda is our invocation. So if we could just take a moment of silence to reflect upon those in our lives and the things in our world that are meaningful to us. Amen. Thank you all. I don't believe we have any introductions. Do we have any introductions of any guests? I don't believe we do. And I also don't believe we have any public comment. I haven't been forwarded any, so am I correct in that?
You are correct.
All right, thank you. So then we'll move on to our consent agenda. And I guess all of these, make sure I've got all my pages correct. This front and back, yeah, okay. So it looks like we've got 7 consent agenda items. Do we have any questions on any of the consent agenda items? And I can't see the whole panel, so Keisha, if somebody raises their hand, just let me know. And if there's no questions, the chair would entertain action on the consent agenda.
Motion to approve consent agenda as read.
We have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye or signal with a thumbs up in camera view.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Motion carries unanimously. We will now move on to our regular agenda, which is consider approval of monthly financial statements for February and March 2021 and quarterly reports for Q2 FY21, and that's your packet pages 154 through 189. Do we have any questions?
Mayor, I did
Yes.
just want to call out a couple of things that are included in your packet. We have monthly financials for both February and March, including the packet, because the March meeting, the meeting earlier in March was held before our month end was complete. So we have 2 months of financials included in your packet. We've outlined any unfavorable variances with expenses. There's just one, and it's related to insurance expense.
Okay.
And that's primarily a timing difference that will be cleared next month. Starting on page 170 is the quarterly investment report. There's a couple of things that I just wanted to call out there. On page 175 is the benchmark comparison, and you can see how DCTA's investment portfolio is performing compared to a couple of other benchmarks. We currently have about 60% of our reserve fund invested in treasuries and agencies. The Our excess cash is in Techstar in overnight funds. And that has hit a close to all-time low at 1 basis point.
Gosh, I'm surprised it's that much.
And so we're continuing to look at investments. We just made a purchase not shown in this investment report this past week, where we got a whole 8 basis points. So we're taking what we can get to try to secure a little bit of additional yield with our excess cash. And then moving on to the grants report that's included in your packet, a couple of things that I did want to mention. One, DCTA has been apportioned $14 million in American Rescue Plan or ARP Act funding. That's similar to CARES Act. It's 100% federal share with no local match. We anticipate using that for operating expenses. We're still learning about kind of the eligibility criteria and the timing of those funds. But we anticipate using those after we deplete the CARES Act funding, which we anticipate in FY22. So just that is shown in the pending grant section on page 188. Also, as you know, DCTA has been providing transportation services to the Denton County vaccine shuttle or vaccine clinic at Texas Motor Speedway. And through Denton County, we have some available funding potentially through FEMA for those shuttle costs. And so our staff is exploring those options to look at what information needs to be provided and kind of what the timing of that is. So those are just kind of some specific things that have varied from previous reports that I wanted to call to your attention. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I've got just a couple, but wanted to give people an opportunity. I heard somebody.
Go ahead, Chairman Watts. My camera's not functioning today, so I'd have to reboot and leave, but
Okay.
When you're done.
Sure. So when you talk about operating expenses, we're checking to see if, I guess, yeah, my first question is, at what point will we have do you think staff will be ready to have a board discussion about, what y'all's findings have been as far as what we can use it for? Can we use it for some of the VIA expenses? Can we use it for, future rail expansion? I mean, just because that's a lot of money sitting there. So
Sure.
When do you anticipate we'll be having that discussion?
So, I mean, we expect that it will be utilized similar to the CARES Act funding,
Okay.
which we primarily use for operating assistance. There's a portion that is dedicated to safety and security, but we're utilizing the CARES Act funding right now for operating assistance. And so the VIA service would be eligible for operating assistance as well. And that's at a 50-50, typically a 50-50 local and federal split. With the CARES Act funding and this ARP funding, it's 100% federal, meaning that we can fully reimburse our operating assistance costs for that. And in talking with FTA, we do believe that the VIA service would also be eligible for that. So versus, right now we're drawing down expenses paid to NTMC operators and for fuel and all of that. And so we would substitute kind of those expenses with the VIA hourly rate that includes operators and fuel and insurance and all of that. And so we expect that will be similar. It's really just to see if there's any additional language this time around that has any additional stipulations to it.
So then just a couple of follow-ups, or just a follow-up and then a different question. So is it my understanding, and sometimes I have to use examples because I don't operate at the high elevation very, very well. So let's say, for instance, we've got $1 million worth of expenses from NTMC that DCTA typically pays. I mean, we pass through, we pay for it. Am I correct in understanding you saying that some of the CARES Act funding can supplement that? In other words, the CARES Act funding can pay, let's say, $500,000, and DCTA would then be responsible for the other 50% if it was this 50% match. Is that the concept? Do I have a correct understanding of that?
With our regular formula funding, yes. So typically if we paid $1 million in NTMC operating expenses through our 5307 formula funding, we would draw down 500,000 as a reimbursement. All of our formula funding is reimbursement. With the CARES Act funding, which is also a reimbursement, it's 100% federal match. So if we pay $1 million, we would request reimbursement from FTA for $1 million. And it will be the same thing with this via service as well.
So how do we handle that budgetary wise? Because in essence, what we're saying is where we were going to have to spend $1 million from our operating funds, we don't have to do that, which means technically we should have that amount of money, flowing down to the reserve balance. Is that correct? I mean, if we're not spending it and we're getting reimbursed for it, and so is that correct?
Yeah, so we still record the expenses, and then we record grant revenue for that reimbursement. And so in the long range plan that we adopted with the FY21 budget, we showed that 23.4 million in
Gotcha.
funding.
Okay.
We had it split. We kind of forecast out based on our budgeted expenses, how much we think we're going to draw down each year. And so, we have that projected to be depleted in the second half of FY22. And so our intent is in the next long range financial plan, we would then add in this ARP funding once a grant is executed for that 14 million. And we would show that likely going into FY22 and FY23 to reimburse those operating assistance expenses. So to go one step further to, I think maybe what your next question is going to be, if we have additional expenses with this via service because of expanded service hours or whatever the case may be, we would then amend the budget to capture those additional expenses that we intend to incur. And then also we would just kind of front load more of that grant revenue to show that reimbursement.
Okay, great. Well, and my last comment is, I guess it was yesterday or day before that it was announced that they're going to be discontinuing the vaccine clinic out at the speed. So that will help us sort of have an ending date to where we can calculate our costs and those kinds of things. So that'll be interesting to see what our costs were and how much we can get back from whatever source of funding that would be available. So thank you so much for answering those questions. TJ, did you have additional questions?
I'm just, and I may have missed this, my apologies. Can we use those funds for double tracking or maybe getting the A train to Silverline?
Our grants manager is listening in, and she has texted me that we can only use the ARP funds for operating assistance. So we can't do any kind of capital projects. It's only for operating assistance.
Thank you.
Yep.
What we can do is draw those dollars down for operating assistance, which would free up local sales tax dollars that we could then use for capital investments elsewhere. The $14 million was actually after reached out to the CEOs across the U.S. when the Biden administration was talking about additional funds to help infuse dollars into the economy. I had to actually answer a survey about whether we needed additional funds. We submitted it to, obviously it turned out to be a good thing. We have an extra $14 million that for all intents and purposes can be drawn down into our operating assistance at 100%. It's just it's a source of funding that can be used to offset where we might have otherwise used our sales tax dollars. So in essence, it gives us additional funds. So to your point, we could use our sales tax dollars to fund extensions on the silver line or getting down to the silver line.
And we do also receive annual formula funding as well that typically pre-COVID and pre-CARES Act and ARP, we used for our 5307 formula funding for preventive maintenance and operating assistance. And so now if we have these CARES Act funds and ARP funding for operating assistance specifically, that gives us the option to then potentially reprogram some of that formula funding for capital projects or double tracking or something like that.
TJ's had answer your question?
That does. Thank you so much.
You bet. Any other questions on this agenda item 1? Do we need any type of approval or anything on this? I don't think we do. I think this is,
Yes,
Or-
sir. We would ask
We
for
do?
approval of the financial
Okay.
statements and quarterly reports.
all right. Chair would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Do I hear a second? All right, we have a second. All in favor of approving agenda item 1, signify by saying aye or raising your thumb in your camera. Aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously. I'll get that one figured out, which one I want to choose, sorry. Agenda item number 2, everybody's approval, stand on your head. Agenda item number 2, consider authorizing CEO to execute a task order with VIA for microtransit on-demand service delivery. And this is in your packets, your pages 190 to 239. And oh, again, thank you for having the hard copy to the house. I mean, next time I can come pick it up if it's going to be a special delivery, but I really do appreciate it. It's very helpful. So thank you so much for doing that.
Well, thank you. As you mentioned, the information can be found in your packet on pages 190 through 239. As discussed at the April 7th special called board meeting, the board's approval of VIA's proposed service plan and cost would be the linchpin for 2 critical items in our current process. The first being the public involvement period, which did successfully launch this past Monday, April 19th. And an informational report or a progress report on the public involvement process can be found in your packet on pages 337 and 338, just for reference. But the second item that your approval on April 7th kickstarted was really the development of the task order for VIA services over a 4-year period of time. And we have included that task order in your packet today for discussion and consideration. Both Marissa and I have quite a bit of information to go over kind of in support of this item to make sure that the board feels completely up to date on all details. We would recommend that we walk through the presentation and then kind of open it up for discussion and question if that pleases the board.
Sure, you bet. That's fine.
Okay, perfect, great. So on this slide here, the task order is structured in 3 phases. These are the 3 phases that are based on board feedback that was provided on April 7th. So as you can see, the majority of the add-on services were added into phase 1 with limited service add-ons in phase 2A and phase 2B. Based on this feedback, including some of the zone and time modifications that were requested from the board on April 7th, the total amount for year 1 is a not to exceed of $6.9 million. All of the not to exceed costs are broken down by year within the task order that's found in your packet. The task order specifically can be found on pages 193 through 197. And then the annual details for each of the 4 years total a not to exceed for $33.5 million. And as we've discussed in prior meetings, the deployment of any mobility services within the task order would require board approval of the service plan, any hard costs, and not to exceed service costs, as well as a budget amendment. So the task order simply serves as a framework for that, but the board would still be required to approve each individual component within the task order as we moved into a launch phase. If you'll go to the next slide, this is a snippet of the updated VIA proposal that's included as Exhibit 2 in your packet today. Specifically, this slide can be found on page 230 of your packet. This slide details out year 1 costs, including the hard costs that were discussed at the April 7th board meeting. So based on the recommendations of the board on April 7th, there was an increase to hard costs because there was an increase to the number of singular fleet that would be required in order for us to launch phase 1 of the service. If you'll go to the next slide. This next slide here is a snippet from VIA's proposal that again is in your packet. This can be found on page 233 within your overall packet. This is the 4-year not to exceed cost model. And this is the exact model that was utilized in the development of the task order. So it's formatted a little bit different in the task order, but all of the numbers match with this singular fleet 4-year cost model. I'd like to hand it off to Marissa. She's going to cover a few of the cost comparisons regarding kind of this proposed service and what we're currently operating with DCTA. And then she'll hand it back over to me. We'll cover a few more items and then we'll open it for discussion.
All right, so we referenced in the April 7th meeting cost comparisons from what we currently have budgeted to the VIA proposal at the $41 per service hour. I had mentioned in that meeting our direct costs associated with the service equate to roughly $50 per hour, or roughly 3.8 million. Based on our FY21 budgeted service hours. And so this is just, the next couple of slides are just a breakdown of that cost calculation, as well as some indirect costs. And so based on the VIA proposal, of course, the VIA service hour cost would include operators, any fuel insurance for those vehicles, and liability. We currently have 2 lift contracts for the, I have this $1,200 listed as Louisville Lakeway Zone, but that's actually the Louisville Flower Mound lift service, as well as the Highland Village lift service. And with a transition to VIA, those contracts would be terminated and replaced by a VIA service. In VIA's cost proposal, they would also maintain the vehicles and of course provide the vehicles. And so these costs that we have shown here totaling 4.2 million equate to what we currently have budgeted in the FY21 budget for these services. And these are the costs that would essentially be replaced by the VIA service. This is based on the budgeted service hours of 73,000 hours. If you'll go to the next slide, we also have some the indirect costs, and this is, Mayor, the major difference between the number that you had mentioned from the cost allocation model, which is fully allocated every dollar the DCTA spends. The salaries of the folks on this call, our office supplies, everything under the sun, our administrative facility. And so obviously some of those costs are fixed. You know, our lease expense is what it is, regardless of service, unless we look at, you know, selling a building, relocating, et cetera. So some of these costs are variable, some of them are fixed, but they're all indirect costs because they're not necessarily associated with one particular service. And so through the cost allocation model, we allocate all of those costs accordingly. So that includes the NTMC administration department, which is the GM, the AGM, human resources, and an office coordinator. That includes supervisors and dispatchers. Included in this vehicle maintenance cost shown here is the personnel, so the NTMC maintenance employees. I've also shown the facility costs allocated, and that's for all DCTA facilities except for rail, because we allocate that building solely to rail. But so DDTC, the bus O&M facility, and then our costs associated with this admin facility. And the next column is DCTA administration and mobility management. So that's the folks that currently manage our bus operations, various contracts, that's accounting, finance, planning and development, marketing, all of the DCTA employees and associated expenses. That also includes different service contracts that we have. And then the last, customer service, the allocation of that. So we allocate all of those costs based on a variety of metrics through the cost allocation model. And so that total is 5.9 million associated with these services that we are considering transitioning to VIA. In the next slide, we've kind of combined those two. So the 4.2 direct costs, 5.9 indirect, gets to a total of $10 million of total costs allocated to these services. And so when we're looking at, how this change to VIA would impact the budget, there's a couple of different ways we can look at it. The direct costs only equate to 4.2 million. Now, obviously, some of the indirect costs we would expect to reduce with a reduced service level. So, so in that example, we've shown in kind of the next line down that 5.4 million is assuming that with a transition to VIA, we would be able to reduce our indirect costs by 20%.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Is this the direct cost? Is this for the 4-year period?
This is just what's included in the FY21 budget.
Oh, 21. Okay, year 1. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Yep. And so then in kind of the bottom 2 lines, we've taken the VIA estimated costs of the 4106 per hour, plus their upfront costs. And we've shown 2 different amounts here. So what DCTA currently has budgeted in the FY21 budget for the Connect Zone and Highland Village Lift service is 73,000 service hours. So if we were to just take the exact same number of service hours and replace it with VIA's costs, that would equate to 3.1 million. So you can see that delta between what we currently have budgeted and a VIA service would be savings of about $1 million. The next line down shows the base scenario for year 1 that VIA has included, that we have included in the packet today. And that's roughly 99,000 hours. So it's about 30% more hours than we currently have budgeted. But at their hourly rate, plus their upfront costs, that comes to 4.3 million. And I've added a note here just to kind of formalize the takeaway from this slide, which is that our current budgeted direct costs for 73,000 hours would substantially cover what VIA is proposing for 99,000 service hours. So you can see just because of that hourly rate difference, with very minimal impact to the existing budget, we would be able to provide roughly 30,000 more hours by transitioning these services to VIA. And that's of course without going into the indirect costs. And we've asked NTMC management to provide us, what they believe their staffing levels would look like with this proposed change in service and with a reduced level of service that NTMC is providing. So across the board, how many support staff they would need, how many maintenance personnel they would need, all of that. And so we anticipate to have that information going into the FY22 budget in the next month that we'll talk about at the budget workshop in June. But right now, we think a 20% across the board of indirect costs is a decent estimate for what we could expect to see in terms of indirect cost reductions. And so that would say that, even with a 30% increase in service hours provided through VIA, there would still be some cost savings, assuming that we had some indirect cost savings as well.
Okay.
And so, Mayor, I know you had asked at that April 7th meeting, kind of the difference between the fully allocated versus kind of the direct costs. And so we just kind of wanted to provide that additional breakdown to explain where that comes from. And then, of course, looking at 4-year costs, this is just the year 1 comparison for that.
Sure. What I'd like to do is, before we move from this kind of part of the, because there's a lot of information here, and to see if there's any questions, particularly on this methodology, so that sometimes, when we get out, and I forget questions and things such as that. So once you complete sort of the analysis of the questions that we had, then I'd like to at least open it up for just if somebody had some basic questions of clarification, of which I have a couple.
Sure. And this is my last slide for the cost comparisons.
Oh,
So
this is okay.
Questions.
Yeah. Okay. If we could put that slide back up just for a moment, because you'd mentioned, I'm going to try to work backwards because that's what I remember more clearly. This is the last question I wanted to ask. So you had requested from NTMC, what would their staffing level look like given this transition? Are we going through that process with DCTA staffing? Because I mean, there are a lot of these indirect costs are also based upon, some services that we provide. DCTA provides sort of, back office services and things such as that. So, and that question, I mean, it's either a, yeah, we have or we're not, but we can. I don't need much detail on it. And then also, so make sure that I understand this cost allocation. So you're saying that 20% or about $1 million of the 1.2 million of the 5.9 indirect costs, we can attribute or we can realize as a quote unquote cost savings for VIA. Now, and your point is well taken. I don't want to go without really acknowledging this and saying that I think it's a really great thing. And that is we are getting more services for the same amount of direct costs. So I want to make it very clear that my questions aren't about somehow we're not gaining our value. I think my question has been primarily, I thought I knew what value we were gaining until the April 7th board meeting. And then I realized, oh, okay, I need to refine that a little bit. So is my understanding then that if we're saying that 20% of the cost allocation we're estimating would not be necessary based upon the VIA proposal, that then the other 80% of those indirect costs are attributed to the North Texas contract and the rail, because those are the only really things we've got left other than these third party kind of,
In our access service.
Yeah. Is that, am I seeing that? I mean, if we're taking out the bus component of Denton Connect and Louisville and Highland Village and all those others, then what we're saying is 80% of that cost allocation then continues to remain, that we think that 80% of that is attributed to the rail operation, and we are still running the buses for UNT.
Sure. And I mean, and a portion of that would still be related to the VIA service. So, I mean, as an example, what we pay for our annual audit, I don't anticipate that changing because of the amount of purchase transportation we have through VIA versus what we directly operate.
Sure.
So some of those contracts,
Sure.
our grants, our grants management, I'm thinking of things like that are like in the finance department budget. There's things like that likely, are somewhat fixed or maybe would be very slightly modified. But so that's where, and I mentioned like the lease of this building originally, or the DDTC, we have the DDTC as kind of the hub for the north end of the rail line.
Mm-hmm.
Those costs really don't change with the amount of service that we have.
Sure.
That facility.
Yeah.
So just kind of saying there's probably a 20% savings that we could get from variable costs through various reductions or, service related items that are no longer needed.
And those are actual, I said, but those are actual dollars. I mean, it's like, okay, well, we don't need this, so we don't need to budget for this. And that's what you're saying is, hey, maybe 20%. Okay. All right. That's helpful.
So at least as an initial, while we're still working through, NTMC staffing projections and that sort of.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd just like to add from Marissa's point that there's still federal requirements we have. We still have triennial reviews. We still have invoices that have to be paid, even for VIA. So whether it be, we've contracted our services out on First Transit. We had management related expenses associated with that. So yes, a significant portion of that would remain for rail and for UNT, but there's also an apportionment that has to be provided as far as administration, review, process, following guidelines, reporting that's required of the VIA contract as well. So
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would anticipate that as we get more into the implementation, we'll be able to refine this, because I think it's important that we do a look back to make sure that, how did our assumptions play out? Because then we'll have hard dollars, we'll have hard data and then we'll be able to know exactly, okay, well, we're getting more service. and we're getting it for the same amount of money, or we may be getting it for less when we take into consideration the reduction in some of these variable costs, albeit however small they are. It may be less than 20%, but nevertheless, it's still a savings. But I know it's very difficult to ascertain those right now. But as we get into the implementation stage, we'll have a little bit better opportunity to do that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other board members have questions about this particular part? Because I know this is important and there's a lot of numbers. So I just want to, if you've got some, give you an opportunity to share them now.
I do, and I just want to, I thought I understood this, but now I want to make sure I do. The 5.9 million, I thought initially that was the allocated indirect costs. Is that the allocated indirect costs, or is that our total indirect costs for the agency?
That is our indirect costs allocated to those specific services. Yes.
Okay, so that's not our total
Correct.
costs. Okay.
Correct.
And then the way that played out, I got confused that was our total indirect cost. So the indirect costs allocated, you think, will be reduced by 20%?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you say the allocated costs, and I think Chris confirmed this, that's an actual dollar savings. In other words, the way we allocate this is how much of our effort we think we use doing these different things, correct?
Yes, sir.
And we've kind of got parameters for how we figure that out, but you can reallocate costs and not actually save any money. Right? In other words, the amount of time that you spend doing administering these services can go down, but your costs don't actually go down. You just shift them over to rail because that.
Sure. Just like in the, our lease of the admin facility as an example.
Yes.
Granted, I think TTI, who originally did our cost allocation model, would suggest that still a portion of that cost should be allocated to VIA versus the Connect service, because still there are employees that are supporting the VIA service, paying invoices, monitoring the contract, et cetera. And so some of those costs, I will call them somewhat fixed, although sure, we could move to a smaller facility or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, in other words, y'all's time, let's say that you spend 23% of your time on NTMC right now, it goes down to 10% after VIA. We could reallocate those costs somewhere else, but not have actually saved them.
Sure.
And when you're saying the 20%, you're talking about actual dollars.
We believe yes, that we could through
much like we're having to ask how NTMC's administration would change, we have to do the same thing. So we would look, these are harder dollars to impact, but certainly if we are directly engaged in delivering service between DCTA and NTMC, and we go to a contract, there's opportunities for us to look at all the ancillary things that we do that are, or tertiary things that we do, not ancillary, and find the savings. So to the chairman's comment earlier, it could be more than this, it could be less than this, but we're making a concerted effort that if we are to move forward with this direction and we move forward with VIA, that we will engage in much more rigorous exercise to find those savings. But we believe that 20% is probably a reasonable amount. Going beyond that would be, if we're trying to budget around that, would probably not be recommended until we actually find those savings.
Yeah, and so, and now I think I understand kind of what you've been asked to kind of project what the savings will be, and you don't know until we've implemented it, right?
Well, and as we get further down the path and we get closer to implementation, or maybe once, post implementation, we'll really be able to see how much, what the staffing needs to look like to support the VIA contract. If it's if it requires less staff support or more staff support than our current NTMC contract that we'll still have for access and UNT, and of course, like staff that support the rail line. And so it's really, you know, customer service as an example. If we're saying our service hours are going to increase 30%, that may suggest a need for additional customer service if we're going to have more trips. And so we thought 20% was a reasonable goal to start with in this analysis. But obviously not knowing, like Raymond said, how NTMC staffing levels would potentially be impacted associated with this. It's also why I wanted to specifically mention that, like, even, you know, just looking at direct costs, we're essentially getting 30% more service hours for the same dollars.
Yeah, and when we were making our decision about it, you wanted to give us the numbers that were quantifiable, like absolutely this is a one-to-one substitution service to here's what your dollars bought, here's what they will buy. And
Right.
These indirect costs, that is, you can provide estimates for that, but you can't provide us with dollars because you don't know until you start implementing the VIA contract what
that support needs to look like.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly. And also to acknowledge, I mean, the base scenario here of the 4.3 million is the base scenario. And with the add-ons that the board reviewed at the April 7th meeting, that year one total is closer to 7 million. So acknowledging it's also, you know, many more service hours. But so kind of, you know, trying to provide some additional metrics, you know, should the board choose to move forward with some of those add-ons as well.
Okay, and for instance, like the access add-on with the Title VII analysis, that would, when you do that, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Correct.
More
That's another $1
staff
million
effort.
that's budgeted.
Yeah, but I mean, it
proposal.
also creates a lot more staff effort than maybe some of the other stuff.
Right.
Okay, now, I think I'm clear. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, you're welcome.
Anyone else on this particular portion of the presentation?
Just to, yes, Chair, if I
Yes,
could
go
ask.
ahead.
So as I think as I'm understanding it, what you're saying is we're implementing phase one that's gonna be about $7 million. You're saying with between direct cost and estimated 20% indirect cost, that the difference is 1.6 million. So would it be, am I understanding this correct? If I'm understanding this correctly, your FY21 budget will have an additional 1.6 million in it, or have to have it in it to cover these costs above what was there before.
So this comparison is just the base level service for the 73,000 versus the 99,000 hours. When we're talking about the phase one add-ons and phase two add-ons, which includes access, that's where we get to the 7 million. And I do not have access numbers included in this analysis because VIA has not provided a official quote for what the access service would look like. They've requested some additional information operations to get a better understanding of what that service would look like and what it would cost on their side.
Right.
So that would be a separate analysis that was done. But I mean, in the FY21 budget, we have allocated indirect costs. We have allocated, or we have roughly 1.2 million for access service. So all of these other add-ons are services that we don't currently provide. So, you know.
So what I was looking at is on page 196, where you show the total not to exceed for year one as 6,978,000. So by approving this, we're basically approving this. We're going to move forward with this. and what I was trying to get to was, okay, so you're kind of saying we expect to have a savings of 5.4 million. That's where I was saying, okay, we're expecting to have a savings of 5.4 million by spending 6.9 million or 7 million. Then that's going to impact our budget by plus 1.6 million. That's where I'm.
Sure.
Am I
And-
seeing that
and-
correctly? That's what I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to understand if that's what that's.
Well, if I can take out the $1 million in access service, it's a much better comparison because that is not, I do not have
Right.
any costs associated with
Right.
access here.
Okay.
So that's then
Yes.
5.9 million compared to
Okay.
5.4. So yes, then we're saying it's roughly $500,000 more for
21 budget.
a much larger amount of service.
Right. I understand. Yeah, we're spending $500,000 more. We're getting
Much more service.
30% more hours or almost.
And with all of these add-ons, it's at least twice as much service. 99,000 hours is just the base level. With all of these add-ons, closer to 180,000 hours.
Okay.
So that's almost 3 times as many service hours.
Okay.
For more, or for that 500,000. And I'm going to turn the approval question over to Nicole. But regarding the FY21 budget, so we're, as the timeline currently stands, we're planning to implement at the end of September. And so we would expect, essentially 1 month of costs in the FY21 budget. And the rest of this year, these year one costs would be in FY22 and future years.
Okay.
And related to the approval question, we are asking today for approval of the task order. This is just the structure within the task order. We would still complete additional cost comparison analysis on each component of that to bring back to the board, because the board would still have to approve each individual component of the task order before we actually launched service. So this is really kind of saying this approval basically shows alignment of the board with these various service options, not necessarily pulling the trigger on definite service delivery.
Appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
And to
So-
your question on the budget, later this summer, when we have an approved service plan, after we've done the Title VI analysis and we've received public feedback and we've brought that feedback to the board to discuss, that would be at the point that we would consider amending the budget or, incorporating it into the FY22 budget when we have a more solidified plan. Because through public involvement, we may decide to change some of these add-ons or change the hours or the zone or whatever the case may be that may change some of these numbers.
Correct. And so we are scheduled to bring that back to the board on July 22nd. I would anticipate, based on whatever type of feedback we receive during the public involvement process, that if we anticipate any modification to what we would bring to the board on July 22nd, that we would schedule a special called meeting prior to that July meeting to have that discussion with the board and get board input at that point in time, so that we could remain on schedule.
Question of clarification, and if this is going to be presented later on in this presentation, I'll certainly defer. I guess when I first read the backup, my concern was that the access service delivery was I say included, but it was included and it sort of threw the numbers off for me. So if there's a way that we can either bifurcate, understand that, because I'm going to be very hard pressed to give direction to move forward without some clarification of the cost from VIA on access. And if we have time to do that come our July board meeting and that information is presented at that time, that's fine. But to say that I'm okay with moving forward with such a range of $620,000 to $1 million without any further information, it's going to be difficult for me to do that, because I think we've got such detail on the others that we can make a very clear decision. So I'm just not quite sure what we do with the access portion of these services, where we really don't have And we can talk about that later when we get down to the discussion, because that's going to be based upon the direction of the board and, you know, the majority of the board. But those are sort of my observations on
Sure.
that.
So there are actually a couple things that we can do. So staff was and VIA were really focused on kind of the phase one portions of the service to get those that cost analysis done. And we did not move into the access analysis because that was part of phase two. Since the April 7th board meeting, we have entered into kind of that analysis process. And so we estimated on the high end for access as a part of this task order, knowing that we would be bringing back to the board a more accurately reflected cost. So the board does have an option that we can bring that back to the board as soon as that is available, which would obviously be prior to any sort of launch, or we could actually exclude access from the task order itself and bring back a separate task order once we have actual access costs.
Yeah,
And
I guess.
that second,
Go ahead.
if I may, thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
The philosophy that was used is that we would include it in the task order, recognizing that it doesn't guarantee or commit DCTA to spending that money, but because it's an unexecuted option, that we would still sit down and go through that option, and it would come back to the board to execute the option, so that it was part of the original or initial contract. So we don't get into issues later where typically with contracts that we're using federal dollars, they can't exceed 25% of the original funding that was associated with the contract. So that's why we were trying to include it. If the board's uncomfortable with that concept, we can remove it from the task order.
No, I don't know if I would classify it as uncomfortable. I think it's just been a little confusing. So, you know, because we got what I hear is we got this task order, which the board can give direction to staff to move forward with implementing the task order, but that the task order is still fluid, that the task order really isn't a commitment to anything specific as far as service delivery until we get to a point where, like, let's say the July board meeting after all the public involvement and these kinds of things, so we've got some pretty strong, so I'm not in favor of pulling it out and having a whole separate process. I just want to understand that if we say move forward, that I'm not agreeing to move forward with providing access service without more information. That's really what I'm, so is that correct, Joe? I mean, is that, so if we say move forward, we still have the opportunity to say, we're not going to do, it could be access, it could be one of these other add-ons. We could say, well, we really don't want to do this add-on. So we still have that flexibility. Is that correct?
We could write that, and I'm looking, and I'm going to look to staff because I've not seen the task order, what the task order verbiage would look like other than what's in this report. But this task order, as it states, would move forward with the service parameters and the costs before moving into the actual implementation phase. And then it has access service, which could either be left out or be an add-on as an option.
Okay.
I guess the question is, and Raymond, I'll let you answer this, with this task order and moving forward with service parameters and costs, is there a point where the implementation phase will be another task order and the board could say, we don't want to move forward with the implementation phase at this point?
I'm going to defer to Nicole, but that wasn't the intent that we'd have to come back to the board with another task order. What we do have to come back to the board with is the results of the Title VI analysis. So it's been fairly clear to me that the interest of the board, based on the roundtables, is that we would provide the services as we've discussed, for the exception of an option, which would be the access service. What will change any of this would be any input that we receive from the Title VI analysis. If it says, well, you can't really do this, or there's input from the public that says, well, we'd really like to add this section that's not covered today. If the board reconsiders that and says, yes, we'd like to do that, that's, I believe, what Nicole is saying, that we would come back and say, well, these modifications based on the public input need to be considered because we're supposed to do that. But in order for VIA to move forward and continue to spend their resources on this. They want a commitment that we're going to be moving forward minimally with the base and the options that the board has lined out, subject to input from the public input process and the Title VI analysis. So what we write in the task order is that we would have access as an unexecuted option, subject to board approval. So the money's there, the desire is there to do it, but it requires us coming back to the board for additional approval of that particular portion, because the phase 2 has not been approved.
And we can incorporate into the task order some language that says that we will issue a notice to proceed for each individual phase or even each individual add-on, should that be the board's desire.
Yeah, and if somebody could, because I want to move on from this, because what we're talking about now is a process. They're process questions. If staff could just maybe put together a one-page kind of timeline or next steps for, here, the board's going to give direction on this. This is what are the next steps, and these are your options, just so that we can have that, because I think we're talking about a lot of different things, and it can get a little confusing on the decision tree. So something that's pretty succinct would be helpful.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions on this? And then I guess we've got another section on this particular agenda item.
I just want to add.
Yes, Vice Chair, go ahead.
So really so as I understand it, VIA is not, well, I guess what confused me in this whole thing is that normally when you come up with a task order, there is a fee for them to do that task. And there's not a fee. I read the whole thing. There's not a fee for that. It's more, if we spend this effort, we like some commitment that the board's going to move forward with something. So that's how I'm understanding it. And if that's the way we're proceeding, I guess we move on. I think
that is correct.
That's correct.
So there is a logistics phase, upfront work that is required from VIA in order to launch, whether it's just the base service or the base service plus add-ons. So, getting the app ready, getting all of the back-end infrastructure in place, securing the vehicles and drivers, wrapping the vehicles, those types of things that VIA has requested a minimum of 8 weeks in order to do. But in order for them to enter into that phase and dedicate the staff required in order to do that upfront lift, they would like a task order in place to showcase the agency's commitment.
Okay. I guess it would have been, I would have liked to have known, okay, how much effort are they going to spend in dollar amounts? So they're saying, okay, we're going to spend $200,000 of effort. It would be nice to know that helps me understand, or that's their risk, and that they're wanting some type of commitment to protect them from that.
We do have representatives from VIA on the call today. If that is a question that you would like to pose to that team, I'm sure that they would be happy to answer it.
Because my question would be, if that's the risk, and one option would be you simply say, okay, well, we will commit to paying you so you don't have that risk, and we don't commit to any. We don't want to commit. I think there's a reluctance from everybody to commit to everything until we see everything, until we see the numbers. Anyway, I may ask them how much is their risk? How much effort are they putting into it if they can put a handle?
I know that Alex is on the phone. I know Alex, Lindsay, and Lainey from VIA have joined us today just to answer any board questions.
Okay.
I would open the floor to any of those folks to kind of help answer board member Molina's questions.
Before we do that, I just want to make sure I understood what just Vice Chair said, and because I might be a little confused.
Okay.
If we give direction today to, how is this posted? Execute a task order. In other words, we're executing this task order. Does that mean that we are committing to something? In other words, we couldn't say, you know what, we've done some additional analysis, things have changed. We can't move forward. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I just want to understand exactly what we're doing today and what level of commitment, because I think that's what Vice Chair's, the thrust of his question is like, hey,
That's
are we-
exactly correct.
Yeah. So, and so I need to understand that, because I hear that, well, we cannot use access, we cannot, include it. But yeah, so what exactly are we doing today if we give this authorization to execute a task order? So Joe, what is our level of commitment or legal liability to, is this a contract? If we sign this task order, are we signing a contract?
So we already have, so we already have a contract in
Yes.
place when we awarded, through the mobility services, when we awarded it.
Yes.
We haven't expended anything on the contract yet.
And we don't have to if we choose
Correct,
not to.
yes,
Is that
correct.
correct? Okay. All
So
right.
the task orders is more or less, I would say, the exhibit to the scope of services and
Okay.
compensation. So if you look at the task order that was given in the packet on page 193, it's got a not to exceed budget, and then it's got a scope in there, plan, develop, and implement services
Yes.
outlined in VIA's updated proposal. And obviously this can change. It's an example. So it's that task order that starts the services under, that starts the services of the contractor, but the task order, it's the meat of the contract, if you will.
Sure. It's the scope of work.
Yes,
Is what
exactly. Yes.
Yeah, it's what I'm hearing you say. So when we sign the task order, we are committing to a scope of work. Now the contract is, for better lack of word,
if you will.
complete.
Yes.
It's complete. Now we have not just the contractual framework, but we have the specific scope of work that contract between DCTA and VIA are to perform.
Correct, for this initial, with their initial phase. And then the contract allows, task orders can build on each other to continue to expand that scope of work.
Do they have the ability also, as we've talked about, to contract that scope of work? And I'm not trying to say we're going to do that. I just really want to understand exactly the full scope of what the board is being asked to do. So it's like an accordion. So the task order, you can sort of move in and out of the different things as you move through the negotiations or the further clarification of the numbers to further refine what that scope of work is.
Yeah, so
And the agency, I'm sorry, Joe, go ahead.
So for example, if you did not want to move forward at this point with access service as part of that scope, then you could write that in the task order, or the access service to be an option.
Okay.
And the agency, much like on a rail contract, we have the ability to add service and contract service as required. So the intent would be that we'd ask the board to sign this contract. I think VIA did a good job of estimating the hours, the services, the scope of work has been defined. They've come back and said, this is the cost of what that scope of service would be should you implement it in these different phases.
Okay.
The remaining piece is to get public input to see if there's going to be any changes to that scope of services. If there are, DCTA always has the right to increase or decrease the amount of services that we have. And in a draconian situation, we always have the right to terminate the contract. So I think we're covered from a risk perspective on exactly what hours and level of service that's been requested, what's been estimated. We have to go through the public process, take that feedback. If it makes changes, which typically they're minor changes, then we could address those within the scope that's defined.
Yeah. And again, my questions aren't to, because I think this is a great opportunity for the agency. This is a very important decision, and I want to make sure that I have some clarity on exactly, what we're authorizing And I believe I do, and it's been helpful to have that input from you guys. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, so Vice Chair Molina had a question. I apologize for interrupting, Vice Chair, but I could sense that we were trying to figure all that out. So if Via has a response to the Vice Chair's question, if that question is still on the floor, that would be great.
Well, I think it's kind of been answered. I think what our council said and what Raymond said and what this thing, how it reads is we're basically authorizing $33 million today. That's what the action is. I mean, that's how I read it real clearly. We're authorizing a budget not to exceed $33,500,000 with this approval.
Is that
Right?
correct?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. So VIA really has no risk. We're going to pay them $33,500,000 over 4 years.
No, that's not
I would
correct.
modify that. I don't necessarily agree with the comment that.
That's not right.
That's,
There's no guarantee that they're getting $33 million. There's several factors that go into collaring that. One is that DCTA in all of our procurement documents, we have to have the authorized budget. We have to have the funding to execute the work year over year. So it's not a guarantee that they're going to have next year or the year after that. And that's the same that holds true with our rail contracts and in most contracts that I've seen done. When you authorize 10 years or multiple year contract, you're not guaranteeing the entire amount of the contract. It has to be
for
approved.
work performed. Work that will be
Work has to be
performed.
performed, and we define what level of effort is going to be performed. And through the course of the year, as Via has mentioned through these conversations, if we see that some areas are not performing, then we would certainly contract the number of hours. They wouldn't charge us the total amount. They would charge us based on the hours that were actually performed. And that's standard in even our rail contract and our operating agreements that we typically have.
These are all not to exceed amounts. So not necessarily a flat fee.
Not a flat fee. It's just an amount not to exceed.
Not to exceed.
Almost every one of our contracts that we've signed for this agency is a not to exceed amount. That's standard procedure in the contracts that we do. Otherwise, we'd have to bring back a different task order every year separately and execute each year separately. And it makes it hard for the contractors to plan and commit if they don't know whether we're going to continue to operate this service the next year.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take up any more time. We can move forward. I'm getting it, I think.
Well, Cesar, and this is how I understand it. We've got a 6-figure amount that we're committed to spend. That's a fixed upfront cost. I think it's $164,000. It may have shifted a bit. And then if you look at 194, we're agreeing to pay them a fixed price per service hour. They've given us estimates on how many passengers that would carry. And based on those estimates, they would.
I see it.
The total, in other words, the total cost to us to move the number of passengers we've been moving is about $3.2 million. If we use, based on their estimates, about 30% more service hours to move more people, we'll spend about the same amount we've been spending. And then if we knock it out of the park, we might spend up to $6.9 million, but that's only if a lot more people are using the service. And so that's the way I understand it. We got under $200,000 that we're committing to spend, and then we're going to pay them per service hour based on this fee schedule. And if they're moving a lot of people, we pay them accordingly, and they send us invoices just like we get from the rail, except it's service hour invoices, not just an invoice for we ran the train on this schedule. It's like how many service hours the cars were in operation. Is that right, Raymond?
That is absolutely correct. And I would say that this process is, while it's been a little bit more lengthy, I think the value that this board has received in having input, working with the contractor, defining exactly how the service is going to work, has mitigated a lot of operational risk from what you would intend or what the cities are intending to have as service and what you're actually going to get delivered. Just to give the board some comfort and something as an example, the rail contract was a 9-year rail contract, roughly 130, I don't remember exact amount, it's like $130 million authorization not to exceed. It requires the board's approval of the budget and the hours that they're going to be performed each year. And we have, over the course of the first portion of that contract, we have changed the number of service hours based on what's happening, and they bill us accordingly. So this is very common practice for the board to approve a not to exceed value. And then the operational adjustments happen based on, as Via has mentioned, based on service levels, modifying some of the fleet depending on ridership. To board member Burke's comment, if we're knocking it out of the park and the board wants more service, that would come back and we would pay for those additional service hours. So it's providing the contractual framework to engage with the contractor to complete the remaining work that's required to complete the scope of services, to do what's required federally to meet our requirements, to change the service that we're talking about changing and transition into this new service.
Thanks, Raymond. I think it's just the terminology was throwing me up. I think I was focusing on lump sum type delivery versus this is a cost plus model.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I understand it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Okay.
Appreciate
Chair
it.
Watts? Chair Watts?
Yes.
I believe board member Costa had her.
Yes, go ahead.
Muted. Did you have something, board member Costa? Okay, I saw it unmute a couple of times, I thought. Thank you.
All right. So we've got, I think, another portion of this presentation. And then what we'll do is we'll take a little 5 or 10 minute break after this. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. So if we can pull up the presentation, Keisha, thank you, and go to the next
And
slide.
Nicole, if I can interrupt you real quick.
Sure.
While we were talking, I noticed I was looking at the wrong column on page 196. So in terms of access for year one, if access was taken out in comparison to this analysis, the total service hours would be 140,000 service hours for a cost of 5.97 million. I was looking at the year two metrics instead. So I just wanted to take this opportunity before I hand it over to Nicole to make that correction. So it would be roughly $600,000 increase compared to our 5.4 for almost twice the level of service, 140,000 hours compared to 73.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as we look forward to the launch of Via's on-demand service, it's key that we identify ways to assess the success of that service. And so staff plans to bring the board on a monthly basis the financials and ridership information that we currently do today. It just might look a little bit different because that information will be segmented from our standard, ridership and cost information, but it will be specific to Via's service. And then additionally, staff recommends placing an item on the board agenda on a quarterly basis to specifically do a deep dive and discussion into the data that Via has provided so that we can discuss and make any potential modifications to service if necessary. So much like discussed before, if all of a sudden, ridership is way up, or even if ridership maybe is down and we decide that, we want to scale back a little bit, that we could be having that discussion on a quarterly basis with the board, but you would be receiving the standard reporting on a monthly basis. If you move to the next slide, These are some of the daily and monthly success metrics that we will be looking at. These are standard metrics that transit agencies look at. These are part of VIA's standard reporting structure as well. And so again, we will be looking at these kind of daily, weekly, monthly to ensure that the service is the most efficient as it can be. We'll probably be paying close attention to not only ridership, but also those average wait times to make sure that the service is being as efficient as possible. If you'll go to the next slide. This here is just a sample of VIA's daily service report. They have a very robust dashboard that, again, has standard reporting information, but as part of that logistics phase up front prior to the launch of service, we would be working with VIA directly to customize reports that would be necessary for us to monitor and analyze any data that we're receiving, again, daily, weekly, monthly, so that we can bring that back to the board and make any recommendations for modifications to ensure that the service is as efficient as possible. And then if you'll go to the next slide. This, I know that this is very difficult to see on a PowerPoint slide, but it can also be found in your packet as an exhibit. The red kind of oblong shape is kind of where we are currently in the timeline as it stands. You'll see that we are on schedule with all activities. If the board does so choose to approve the task order, and we would ask, assuming base level service plus additional approval of any add-on options, that would allow us to maintain this existing timeline. I will say, staff is happy to make any modifications necessary, but if we do not have a task order in place, we will have to adjust this timeline, which would then adjust the actual service delivery date for phase one, which we are happy to do. But I just wanted to make sure that the board was aware of that. So that concludes staff's report. I know that was a lot of information to provide, but we just wanted to make sure that you were receiving as much detailed information as possible, as we know today's decision is a really big one on behalf of this agency. And so we would be happy to take a break or enter into discussion. Again, we do have VIA representatives.
No, we're gonna wrap this agenda item up.
Okay.
As far as before we take a break. So any further questions for staff? Of course, if we're going to be asked. This is an action item, is my understanding. So any other questions for staff? Information the board needs in order to move forward on whatever the decision the board decides on this agenda item. Any questions for staff? All right, seeing none, then chair would entertain action on this item, agenda item 2.
And Chair, it would be helpful if in today's motion that we do not only approve the task order, but the board's approval of the base level of service. So that would give staff and VIA the direction necessary to spool up the proper number of vehicles in order to launch base service only. We would still bring back the service plan, the cost, and all of the public involvement information on July 22nd for board's official approval. But if we could include the base service in today's motion, that would provide staff and VIA with the direction needed in order to meet that September 7th date.
Okay, so what you're saying is you want a motion that it's captured authorizing CEO to execute a task order with VIA on-demand service delivery, and you want a little more specificity on what levels of service
A new collection of data.
that includes. Is that my understanding?
That is correct. I think based on today's board discussion, it would help clarify that the board is comfortable moving forward with the base service, which is the cost analysis that Marissa provided today. That way, that gives us clear direction on the number of vehicles that would be required for VIA to kind of spool up during that logistics phase.
Is that including the add-ons?
No, sir. We would recommend that add-ons are brought back separately. The difference in the base level of service is requiring, I believe, 25 vehicles. Some of those add-ons increase the vehicle count to 29. So VIA's, VIA's time required to spool up 4 vehicles is not much. And so, we think that having some direction that the base service is what the board would like to move forward with on September 7th. If we could have that direction, that would be very helpful.
So we would have time if we approve the add-ons separately, or if we give direction separately later on, there's still enough time to implement those at the original launch in September?
Yes, sir. I believe because the delta of the vehicles is only 4 vehicles, the most time that VIA and staff are going to spend are going to be on securing the vehicles, wrapping the vehicles, modifying the vehicles with bike racks, or making them wheelchair accessible. We can do that to the fleet of 25 vehicles. And I believe VIA would be in agreement that, adding additional 4 vehicles, if the board so chooses to add add-ons for the September 7th launch, that the time required to do that to 4 vehicles is minimal.
So, and I don't mean to belabor this, but is the conversation today is what makes staff hesitant to ask the board? Because if you're asking the board to make a motion with some specific language of, and we want to move forward with the base level of services, certainly if the board had a majority that wanted to do the add-ons except for the access and come back and bring that back later, then the board has the opportunity to do that. So your recommendation to maybe not include them right now, is that based upon the discussion today, or was that your recommendation coming into the meeting prior to this discussion?
We would recommend inclusion of all items within the task order itself. But what is needed for VIA to enter into the logistics phase is which component the board is absolutely on board with launching on September 7th.
Okay, all right. I think that helps clarify that. So Chair would entertain action and a motion that my colleagues desire to make on whatever scope of services that they want to include in that motion.
I make a motion to approve agenda item number 2 under regular agenda with the inclusion as described by Vice President Recker, including the base level service.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
All right. So we have a motion and a second for approval of agenda item 2, authorizing the CEO to execute a task order with VIA Microtransit on-demand service delivery for the base level of services as presented today in staff presentation, with the understanding that you'll come back with the add-ons. Is that correct? Is that a correct summary? Okay. All right. All in favor? We're just going to say all in favor.
Chair,
Oh, yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Could I get one bit of clarification?
Yes, sir.
Diane, on your motion, if you look at the presentation, there's on pages 203 and 204. There's a base level service Monday through Saturday. And then there's a base level of service Monday through Saturday, beginning at 5 a.m. What were you proposing?
Nicole?
Staff would recommend page 204, which is updated based on board discussion on April 7th. So the base level of service would be Monday through Saturday, starting at 5 a.m. for a total of $4.07 million.
Thank you for that clarification. That's all I'm ready to vote.
And thank you for that. So moved.
Okay, so yeah, so
Second.
Sam, thank you. Yes, thank you, Sam, for that clarification. I heard someone else.
Now, she just moved to clarify it, and I moved to second that clarification.
Okay, so it is the base level of services from Monday through Saturday from 5 a.m. to, what was it?
11 p.m.
11 p.m. All right. So all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Let's take a little, oh, yes, go ahead.
It's just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
This has no bearing and is not going to impact the Title VI discovery that we're doing with Castle Hills, right?
No, sir. That's
all I need.
Title VI analysis is continuing. And we will still take all add-ons will still go out to the public. We're still collecting that public feedback.
Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's take a quick it's 11:24. Let's come back at about 11, a little after 11:30. And so if you got a lunch that you're trying to prepare, we're going to try to have a a small break for lunch so we can sort of have a working lunch, but give us a chance to prepare it, or maybe I should just admit gives me a chance to prepare it. So we'll come back about 11, between 11:30 and 11:35. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, if people can hear my voice and are close to the screen, let's sort of start gathering back for to reconvene to move down the rest of our agenda. Let's see. It looks like TJ. TJ, are you there? I guess not yet.
I see him as being logged on. He just happens to be muted, but I do see his name.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like then we have a quorum, but are we ready to get started again, I guess, from the recording and official meeting?
Yes, we are ready.
Okay, wonderful. All right, then we will reconvene this meeting of the Board of Directors for the Denton County Transportation Authority. It is 11:36. We're moving through our agenda. And I do want to thank staff and my colleagues for, I think, a really good discussion on the last agenda item. It's a very important, well, it's one of the most important components of the Transformation Initiative and probably one of the bigger decisions that we've made in a long time. So I really appreciate the comprehensiveness, the candor, and just the information that is helpful to help us to make a good decision. So thank y'all so much for that. So we'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is review and discuss Project Manager Office Progress Report.
Thank you. I'd like to hand it over to Chris Newport with Accenture to provide the board with the PMO progress report.
Okay.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Chair Watts. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Morning.
This is relatively straightforward. I intend to move through this rather briskly and maybe speak to the content that's in the risk issues mitigation column here on the slide that's displayed more robustly in the next item, Chair, if that's all right.
Sure, you bet.
But generally speaking, Accenture has been supporting the significant amount of work that staff has undertaken related to the task order that y'all just had a robust discussion around and made a decision on. We have similarly been supporting staff discussions with Trinity Metro regarding a potential framework for an agreement regarding bus operations and maintenance. And then we continue to progress a number of the work streams and transformation initiatives that are included on the roadmap. Specifically, the other areas that we've been progressing besides bus operations and maintenance and the via microtransit service transition relate to the ERP sourcing strategy. We have a market scan underway now assessing potential costs and benefits of alternatives to the current SunGuard solution. And we have also initiated a process required for the VIA service transition with DART regarding GoPass integration. And that will become a broader conversation once the requirements for VIA's integration with GoPass and service for September 7th are fully addressed. So if anyone has any questions, happy to answer those. Otherwise, we could just move to the next slide, which is a visualization of the initiatives that are in flight, either with the PMO office support or by staff. And you can see those items highlighted in the purple there are those work streams that we're supporting directly. And then the items highlighted in green are those that are staff led and in flight as well.
Okay, any questions? All right, yep, let's move forward.
Thank you.
Before we leave that item, I do want
Sorry
to.
about that. I did have a quick question.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
So can you give us a little more detail on what the regional fair integration and management discussion went with DART last week?
Yes, sir. And Raymond, I'm happy to defer to you if you'd like. What play do you want to call?
Let me kick it off and you add in
Okay.
how you feel necessary. So thank you, Board Member Gilmore, because that's the comment that I was going to make. It's important to address that in the as we think about how folks traverse regionally, come from the south, from the Dallas area into our service area. We have integration already with DART, Trinity Metro, and DCTA through the GoPass system. So for folks to traverse regionally, come into our area, and also the reverse of that, folks that are in our area that are going to Dallas, many will buy their fare media through GoPass. So when we put out the original solicitation, there was a requirement that the vendors have integration with GoPass. Trinity Metro and DART are already working on a lot of the integration effort necessary for VIA to connect into the GoPass system. So from a fare media perspective, the systems talk to each other. VIA's aware of it. It was part of the solicitation process. We need to make sure that our license with DART has all the latest version, if you will, that includes the work that VIA has been doing with Trinity Metro, because a lot of the integration that would be required for us to the GoPass is already being done through one of our other regional partners. But we need to make sure that our GoPass contract is up to date, and anything that may or may not be part of the Trinity Metro integration needs to be delivered by VIA. So we needed to kick off those conversations to include DART, VIA, and DCTA in those conversations. Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
I don't have anything to add to that, Raymond.
Okay.
Is that responsive, TJ?
Yeah, no, that helps a ton. Thank you. And then you mentioned, and maybe I'm just reading too much into this, that on 243, you talked about a lack of alignment between DCTA and Trinity Metro.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we not aligned on the bus operations framework? Can you talk a little bit more about what's going on with those negotiations? Because that concerns me greatly.
It's why I proposed, TJ, that we treat that more fully in the next item, where we talk about the status of the potential Trinity Metro agreement for bus operations and maintenance. Thanks. I'd call it a risk, TJ. It's not an issue, right? But we can.
Go ahead, TJ.
All good. I'll wait until Chris is ready to address it.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any other questions before we move forward? All right, Chris, go ahead.
I think that was the conclusion of that item, correct?
Oh, okay. All right. So we're on to the next agenda item 4, presentation and update regarding Trinity Metro Partnership. Packet to page 246, and on PDF it's 252.
Chris, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm happy to lay this out, but Nicole or Raymond, any initial comments before I dive in?
Yeah, well, sure. I asked Chris to do a little bit of work here to add some of the findings from our original transformation initiative, because it's been a while since we've visited those things. I was also in conversations with the board chair and vice chairs. We looked at the agenda, and they had mentioned that there was that we needed better clarity around what we were doing prior, what are we doing now. There's been a couple of questions about what services are we actually talking to Trinity Metro about. And it's never easy when you're talking about two separate entities that have a focus on delivering service, figuring out exactly how to do business. So what we've been doing, if we go back to the original letter of intent that we signed with Trinity Metro, we said that we were going to be investigating the possibility of a local government corp and then potentially an ILA. And if we went beyond that, that we would go out for an RFP. So we've been going through that process. I've asked Chris to put together some slides that will help everyone hopefully get grounded on the direction, what we're doing with Trinity Metro, how that's transformed, and what the next steps are. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris and let us guide us through it. Chris, thank you.
Thank you, sir. So as Raymond was just describing, the discussions around the nature of a potential partnership framework between Trinity Metro, an LGC that they created, MATS, and DCTA have evolved. So they began with this construct of a jointly governed and operated local government corporation, whereby DCTA would be granted seats and have both decision-making rights as well as decision-making responsibilities and liability for the governance and operation of that reconstituted local government corporation. Based on board feedback, and I think there was pretty robust feedback around the lack of viability of that type of construct, the discussions have changed now to focus on an interlocal agreement, which would in effect be a contractual relationship between DCTA and either Trinity Metro or its local government corporation, MATS. But in any event, the end goal of that contractual relationship to be that DCTA is provided comprehensive bus operations and maintenance services by Trinity Metro, either directly through Trinity Metro or more likely through their local government corporation, MATS. That would be a more streamlined decision-making framework for DCTA. It would simplify transaction processing, and it could focus more squarely on setting and then achieving the service outcomes that the board would desire.
And that direction came just to continue to ground the conversation. That conversation and final outcome to pursue an interlocal agreement, I believe, was in February of this year.
Okay, so the elements of the comprehensive bus operations and maintenance services are depicted here below on the bottom third of the slide that's displayed. I'm not going to list them all, but I'd say that the due diligence and operational discussions have begun and are underway. So there are no decisions have been made regarding which roles and responsibilities will fall completely within the MATS side of the ledger versus DCTA. There are clearly going to be services that would be conceptually wholly owned by MATS or Trinity Metro. But if we look at some categories, technology is a good example. For instance, if an agreement is reached, DCTA would still have technology that it would operate. It would not totally hand over its technology stack or its technology staff to MATS, because it still has other responsibilities and other services that those resources provide to DCTA. Similarly, customer service would be retained by DCTA. Okay, next slide. So as Raymond said, why contemplate this in the first place? Just to take us to what feels like a long time back in the past. What you're seeing here, this was the board's feedback. So these are obstacles that you all prioritized back in that first workshop that we had with you back in August, September of last year. So this is presented a number of different obstacles that you all helped create, and then how your votes shook out. So top of the list, things that we've talked about a lot, but board identified the lack of automation and integration between the systems drives a lot of work by staff, and we go down the list. So a lot of opportunity areas highlighting technology capabilities that can drive efficiency gains and increased integration and data availability that would improve decision making by the board. We could go to the next slide. Pulling back from the current state assessment, focusing on service and technology, again, the findings were that a lot of the improvement opportunities and the pain points related to inadequate bus specific operations and maintenance applications, that there were opportunities to realize both operational and cost-effective potential synergies through regional partnerships. We specifically called out Trinity Metro and DART. And then the lack of onboard technology in the bus vehicles themselves really prevents DCTA from doing the planning that it would like to do, from integrating or even having a sufficient awareness of the customer experience, and then drives a lot of challenges, specifically within the finance team around cost allocation and reporting that meets the board's expectations. So if we go to the next slide, I don't know, you've had a chance to review this several times now. If there's any questions, I'm happy to go into it. But this being the highlighted area, this is a slide from the current state assessment. We've highlighted on these next slides the content that we feel speaks directly to where this potential relationship with Trinity Metro would directly address a finding from the current state assessment. The next slide was from the agency application assessment and the priority heat map. Again, we've highlighted the relevant section for the purposes of this discussion of the potential partnership. Both the area where we suggested there were the most shortcomings related to application capabilities, and then staff and board identified highest priority areas were largely concentrated in the bus operations and maintenance categories. Next slide, please. And this is just another, we call out the specific applications here, and the opportunities for improvement associated with each one. And I'm highlighting these because in each of those categories, and we can go to the next slide unless the board has a specific question here, but Trinity Metro, one of the benefits of them being adjacent, but also being a transit operator themselves, besides their scale of operations, which can yield some economies through a partnership, they also have an existing technology stack and investments in onboard vehicle technology that will address pretty comprehensively a lot of the opportunity areas that we called out in our assessment. Okay, we can move on. and y'all please stop me if y'all have any questions related to finance. A large driver of the volume of manual activities that the finance team undertakes today to conduct daily business is driven by bus operations and maintenance capability gaps. We've talked a lot about the lack of integration between the systems that exist. There are a fair number of paper-based processes that go on related to in the procure to pay, in the procure to pay cycle, and then in cost allocation and reconciliation. Also can require a lot of rework besides the initial steps. So again, this is an area that a potential partnership with Trinity Metro or MATS would be addressed. Next slide, please. Systems not being integrated and the platforms being largely outdated for the agency that DCTA is today compared to what it was when it made a lot of the investments in the tooling that y'all use and processes that have been built around it. Next slide, please. And click again, please. Yeah, so this call out box there, highlighting the manual processes. So this is, would you go back up, please, onto the initiative roadmap slide that has the green and orange shading on it? Should be one slide down. Go forward, please. I believe it's 2 clicks. One more. We ask that you please bear with us. There we go, right there. Okay. So the this is another view of the transformation roadmap initiative list. And what I've attempted to depict are the initiatives that would either be directly or indirectly addressed through this potential partnership, contractual relationship with MATS or Trinity Metro. So the items that are in green, based on the discussions that we've been a part of so far with Trinity Metro and MATS leadership, we are fairly confident that that number one, the contractual relationship and execution of it would be technically and operationally feasible. And the items that are depicted in green would be directly impacted, and you should see direct benefits from a potential partnership due to Trinity Metro's status as a public transit agency, the scale of their operations, the investments that they've made in their technology capabilities, and their operating experience. So as you can see, a number of the items that were on the board's transformation roadmap stand to be addressed through and rather elegantly, I would say. TJ, if you recall when we were talking through our future state initiatives, you asked a question. I'm pretty sure it was you. You asked whether we were recommending purchases of different technology systems, for instance, and my reply was, no, these are capabilities that ought to be addressed, whether you buy them, build them, or you gain them through a partnership. The point was that to address the capability gap and gain it. So we've got a fair number of initiatives and improvement opportunities that could be addressed through a single contractual relationship. So a potentially rather elegant way to address the board's priority areas. The items in orange that are highlighted would stand to be indirectly benefited from a contractual relationship with MATS. I'll just give one example, the ERP upgrade or replacement. As y'all know, and as we've discussed before, a lot of the volume of the manual interventions that the finance team has to carry out on a day-to-day basis is driven by the lack of automation, integration, or modernization in the tools that are used by in bus operations and maintenance and the procurement of parts and the invoice tracking, et cetera. So the volume of, because of Trinity Metro or Matt's capabilities, the volume of those tasks would be decreased through a partnership, and therefore the severity of that issue, or the extent to which the ERP upgrade or replacement would be holding DCTA back would be decreased, just because the workload would be reduced potentially significantly through a partnership. Okay, next slide. And this will be wrap up, Chair Watts. So we've discussed where the conversations stand today. Is there are ongoing discussions around the interlocal agreement between DCTA and MATS as the working structure. We've described that that we believe they're technically and operationally feasible. What remains to be seen is whether or not we'll be able to arrive at a legal construct that'll meet DCTA board expectations and Trinity Metro board expectations. So that's kind of where the rubber meets the road when you're trying to align between two parties. With respect to the transition, Raymond and Trinity Metro have completely aligned on a very deliberate phased implementation plan if an agreement is to be reached. So keeping the focus on delivering the transition to via service, but providing for, once that is in hand and stabilized, providing for a transition period that can be side by side with existing management and potential new management. Obviously, there a lot of things need to occur before that would be launched or contemplated more fully. And the intention is that the board would be fully briefed when the time is appropriate and the conversations have reached the point where a transition plan could be provided to the DCTA board. So you can see the next steps here. I think the most important next step is to, I believe, understand the board's preference and direction regarding a feasible partnership framework, a legal construct. We believe the interlocal agreement with MATS or Trinity Metro could work. A lot of details to work out, but I think that is the critical next step. And then there are additional fact-finding discussions that need to continue. Obviously, you need to get a very clear picture of financial implications of the relationship and continue defining roles and responsibilities related to each of the functional areas. But Raymond, is there that would close my comments out, unless there's anything you feel like I didn't cover off on.
No, I appreciate your overview, Chris. I know that it would be great if we could encapsulate this in a small time frame and bring back budget forecast, all the legal ramifications in a short time frame. But having been working in this area for 30 years now, these relationships take time. And what we intended from the original outset was to look at this list of transformation initiatives and figure out, do we build, buy, or partner? And as Chris just reviewed and showed, there's a lot of opportunity. And what we needed to investigate through the interlocal agreement and what we've been talking to Trinity Metro about, and I may have used the word negotiate, or it was implied that there's negotiation. It was really a lot of fact finding and investigation on technically, can we do what we're expecting or what we think we can do to achieve the initiatives that Chris laid out. I feel reasonably comfortable, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, that from a technical perspective, we can certainly we can achieve those green highlighted items in this list. So I believe that we vetted that out. I don't think there's any technical reason why we can't do what we would like to do. It really comes down to what Chris pointed out earlier is, can we find a contractual framework that addresses, really it comes down to risk and liability from both agencies. Is there, even with an interlocal agreement, there's typically questions about indemnification and liability. And so there's really no reason to look at that if we don't technically feel like we can achieve what we need to achieve. I'm here to say today, I believe that both agencies feel technically we can get there. All we have left now is legally, can we do it? And financially, does it make sense? So that's the update.
Hold on, I think I'm muted.
No,
I'm
you're
muted.
not.
No, yeah. So I guess only I can lose agenda sheets when they're sitting right in front of me. I mean, so let me make sure I understand. So the next steps are, we're continuing to have a discussion with the aspiration of moving toward, and I guess that was my comment in the agenda meeting was, are we moving toward sort of integrating all these things we've discussed today, technology and all these kind of things, into a, better lack of a term, a turnkey bus operation agreement, which would be all encompassing and comprehensive to address those green items that we saw on the slide for the transformation initiative sort of goals. Is that sort of, to summarize, is that the objective here?
Yes.
Okay. And so what you need from the board right now is you're just giving an update and just kind of, if there's any questions or any other direction or comments, to share those with you.
Correct. And I would say that we aspire to do some things at the same time as we were doing via, through conversations with board members, including yourself, board chair. I think it became pretty apparent that we needed to focus on implementation of VIA. That right. Has to be the focus of this agency. I think the board acknowledged and provided feedback when we said, look, let's not go down the road with a local government corp. Let's look at an arm's length agreement. That's the direction that we've been moving on through February, or since February. In conversations with Trinity Metro and DCTA, we think it would be in both agencies' best interest to not slow down, but to take our time and to let these two initiatives kind of separate in time a little bit so that we can focus on getting VIA implemented. And to your earlier point and guidance to me was, hey, we don't know if or when or the right timing for this to happen, but probably, and these are my words, probably would make a lot more sense for everyone in this process to make sure that we have an effective implementation of VIA, that we're able to understand what impact that has on administration, on indirect costs. Continue to work with Trinity Metro because they're not integrated work streams here. And if we can get through the cost analysis, if we can get through discussions between Trinity Metro side and our side around liability and risk, which take time, at the appropriate time, then we can talk about an implementation plan. But I think trying to get them all done in the same year is it's not feasible with the size of staff we have. And I think that we could have moved forward more quickly with a local government corp because we would have been more tightly integrated. But with an arm's length contract, I think it makes more sense to make sure that we have all the details figured out before we implement that.
Sure. Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is we're going to give the VIA implementation a chance to happen without the competition or uncertainty of what we're trying. In other words, give this discussion some time to sort of bake, if you will. And okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on this agenda item? I don't think there's any. This is just an update, I believe.
Correct.
I got a
So
quick
there-
one. I
Yes,
got a
go
quick
ahead.
one, Mayor Watts.
Yes.
Chris, if we do look to turnkey this, I would want to make sure that we've got a good cost benefit analysis that
Okay.
comes back to us. I think that's important. It gives us a holistic view. As positive as I think this conversation has been and will continue to be, that I like to see the numbers.
Okay.
And then I had one other. Let me look at my notes here. If we do jump with these guys, and I think the material says we're looking at a fourth quarter launch for 2021. Is that right?
Either fourth quarter or first quarter. Again, we want to make sure that we're focused on, there's not a pressing goal line. I would say that would be likely, and when we would look at doing this, if legally we can come out and we do a cost benefit analysis and everybody agrees, we would come back to the board. We would certainly want to talk about what is the right time frame to implement this transition. Let's not forget, and I know you're not, but I just want to make a point that we have a system that's working with the NTMC. We're operating. We created and implemented the NTMC for the very purpose that we could continue to operate while we investigated these different opportunities. So I would say that if we're asked, that's what we're looking at, it would be maybe fourth quarter or first of year, but there's nothing pressing us to do that. I think both sides agree that we should take our time, do it right, get both sides, both boards comfortable, get both staffs comfortable with what it costs, what the benefits are. I think a cost benefit analysis is absolutely warranted. Make buy is very important as we look at these things. But yes, that would be the intent, is that we take our time, do this right, and the earliest we would look at doing something would be fourth quarter or maybe first.
Well, and that kind of leads in, since most of that service is UNT. It might make sense to do that during a school break as opposed to
Yes,
a hard,
exactly.
maybe make a softer transition and be more customer focused that way.
correct. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I just wanted to make sure I'm understanding, so I would like to sum up in my own words and have Chris or Raymond confirm. We're putting this on hold because it's not the right time to negotiate this or finalize a plan until we know what VIA is doing. And is that correct?
Well, we're not putting it on hold. We're going to continue to work with Trinity Metro to try to vet out the cost and the business side of the ILA. But we're not going to be taking any actions as far as integration operations. We're not committing to, again, this whole thing we're still working on the auspices of a letter of intent to investigate and to see if we can reach an agreement with them.
Okay, but you don't anticipate, so you're going to continue to work on analyzing and talking with them whether or not the business points will work, but you don't anticipate bringing us any action until after the fall.
If we can get all of the ducks in a row, we would be bringing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, the approach would be when we have something to share with this board that's worth sharing with regard to construct, does it make sense? We will brief the board. We wouldn't engage with Trinity Metro and to the point that we're talking about implementation and we're executing on hiring or transferring staff. We wouldn't do any of that until later in the year. It wouldn't be fall, because that, if we're suggesting that it would be either during the holidays or the first quarter of next year, or maybe thereafter, that we would start then, because we need probably a good 6 months to do the transition. So we'll continue to work with Trinity Metro. We'll bring back updates if they make sense to bring back. We'll engage Joe and their attorneys. We've been talking to them about, now that we've kind of got the technical side done, that due diligence, we're moving into what does it cost, and can we bring back something to this board that makes sense from a business perspective. If we determine that we can't, we'll brief the board on that, and then we can move forward in looking at other ways to achieve the business terms. it really just comes down, in my opinion, to business terms and cost, and that's kind of where we are.
Okay, and right now, you still believe that of those issues that we identified that relate to this is still probably the best solution. And right now, you're not looking at other solutions. You're focused on working this one out.
I think yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Primarily,
I'm fine with that. I just
work.
didn't want anyone to have an expectation that you were doing something else other than this to try to find a solution. In other words, it's not a criticism. I just want to make sure I know this is still what you think is the best solution to those issues we just talked about. And you're focusing attention on it. It's just you're delaying. We're kind of, like you said, just letting it bake, but we're not looking at anything else right now. This is still our focus.
This is our focus, and primarily because we have NTMC, we have the operation running. I don't see any reason to take on multiple tracks. It's the same small staff that's working on VIA, on a lot of other initiatives, and it's just I don't think putting an RFP out on the street while we're trying to work on something with Trinity Metro would be fair to competitors or to Trinity Metro. So I think we take our time on this and let these kind of spread apart a little bit so that we can focus on the VIA implementation.
Okay. Any other questions on this agenda item? So we'll move on to agenda item 5. Let's take a quick 5 or 10 minute break. And if people have got lunch going on, we'll come back and we're going to knock some of these out. So we'll come back at 12. It's 12:15 now. Let's come back at 12:25. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if you, we'll get started here in just a moment or two.
Are we? I'm back. I'm just going to be eating off camera.
Thanks, Sam.
I've got to take a call right quick, so I'll be back in 2 minutes. All right, thank y'all. So we'll gather around the fire, and I think that's a song. I think that's a John Denver song, but I'm not going to go into singing it.
Oh, come on.
Yeah,
Maybe a couple of bars, please.
yeah, no, I would not do it justice.
Summit.
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe that's a different song I'm thinking about. Okay, let's see. Have we got a quorum?
We have a quorum present.
Okay, thank you. All right, well then we'll go ahead and get started on our agenda item number 5, which is discuss the extension to the interlocal agreement with the city of McKinney for the provisions of McKinney Urban Transit District, Collin County Transit Services.
Yes, thank you. As the board will recall, the McKinney Urban Transit District previously requested an extension of their agreement with DCTA that would be from January 1st of this year through June 30th of this year to allow MUTD and the city of McKinney staff to explore additional or future service delivery options for the services of Collin County Transit. And the DCTA board did approve that extension. So we're currently in that extension. MUTD has since come back to DCTA and requested an additional 6-month extension of their existing contract that would go from July 1st of this year through December 31st to allow DART and DCTA through our MOS service contract system time to put together a service delivery proposal for consideration. Additionally, MUTD has reached out and asked for a joint letter of agreement from DART and DCTA stating our intent to provide a proposal before that December 31st deadline. As a reminder, the DCTA administrative fee policy is applied to any contractual agreement with MUTD, meaning that DCTA is fully reimbursed by the city of McKinney for all Collin County transit services. We are bringing this item as a discussion for two purposes today. One is in preparation for an action item that we would bring back to the board next month, where we would ask for approval of 3 separate items. One would be the 6th amendment to the ILA with the city of McKinney. The second would be an extension with Irving Holdings for their contractual component. And the third would be a corresponding budget amendment showing that fully reimbursable cost for the extension of July 1st through December 31st. But the second item is that we did want to notify the board of this joint letter of agreement request that MUTD did submit to both DART and to DCTA. Legal has reviewed a draft of that letter and has expressed no legal concerns. The reason that a draft of that letter is not in the packet is because it was not finalized until earlier this week. But we do have a draft of that and legal has reviewed it. So while this item on today's agenda is informational only, it would be helpful to receive board feedback today on both the joint letter of agreement and the contract extension, if it's not the board's will to consider approval of that next month. MUTD does have a board meeting scheduled for, I believe it's May 8th, to kind of discuss this and next steps. And so obviously the May DCTA board meeting would play a pivotal role in their overall timeline.
Okay. Questions for staff? So what you're wanting, then Nicole, is sort of our temperature on moving forward.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. And as far as refresh my memory in the backup, we are recovering the administrative fee pursuant to our policy. And
Yes,
this is
sir.
just an extension. It's not a re-up for another year or two. It's just to give them an opportunity to find a solution and to contract with DART on some services. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And I will add that the joint letter of agreement, we have legal review that there's no language in that letter that would hold DCTA responsible for delivering any services beyond just this 6-month extension.
Okay, all right. Questions or comments?
I do have a comment,
Yes,
Chair.
go ahead.
So through this process with the McKinney Urban Transit District and DART, there's been some discussions about how DART might provide services into McKinney. It's been very collaborative, the discussions between DART and DCTA. Most of the discussions have been between the two agencies because in a go-forward plan, it would be proposed that DART would take the lead in the relationship with McKinney Urban Transit District. Through that process, DART reached out and said, look, we can provide the on-demand service with contracts we have. We talked with McKinney Urban Transit District and the two agencies about how we would deliver more of the wheelchair required vehicles. And it became pretty apparent that the best strategy for DART McKinney Urban Transit District would be to continue to ask for those services from DCTA. So as we've been exploring how to serve that part of the region, Collin County, DART provides services into the southern kind of tip of Collin County. We're providing services throughout Collin County. It became pretty apparent that there's a great opportunity for DART and DCTA to work together in serving the McKinney Urban Transit District into the future. I think that's where the letter of intent is coming from. We're not obligating DCTA to anything at this point, but there's a request to ensure, I guess, from McKinney Urban Transit District that DCTA and DART would continue to collaborate and to provide services into the McKinney Urban Transit District. And one of the things that we're doing is using or leveraging the Moss contract to provide those services, and at least have a contractual way to provide services in should the board desire to move forward with a joint venture, if you will, providing services into the McKinney Urban Transit District area. So I wanted to give that feedback. Again, nothing committed yet, but this extension will allow those conversations to continue to bring it to a fully vetted solution that we can bring back to this board in the future. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other comments or questions or direction to staff from my colleagues?
I think moving forward with their request would be reasonable.
I would tend to agree, as long as, you know, from what the staff's telling us, they're following our policy. Therefore, they're not a liability to the existing member cities. So I don't have a problem extending it in 6 months.
All right. Yes. Okay. So, I see Sam. All right. I think I hear a consensus. Is there anyone who objects to moving forward with what staff's recommendation is as far as an extension for the 6 months based upon the letter and things such as that?
And I will clarify that we will be bringing the request for formal approval next month.
Yeah, but yeah, you had asked for if we
Yes.
we didn't want to do that, then sort
Correct.
of let you
Yes.
know.
And just point of clarification, I believe they're asking for me to sign or someone to sign on behalf of DCTA to
Correct,
the letter
correct.
of intent. So
That is
there's no
correct. So the
financial obligation.
CEO of DART is signing on their behalf, and they're asking for Raymond to sign on behalf of DCTA.
And that letter of intent just expressing what board's direction is right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yep. I think we have direction that to go ahead and execute that, and we can move forward with the formal process of the extension agreement.
Thank you very much.
You bet. All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is discuss potential interlocal agreement with DART for the joint rail operation and maintenance facility and regional partnership opportunities.
Yes, and I'm going to take that one, Board Chair, since
Okay.
Christina's voice is fleeting at this point, and
Sure.
I've been fairly engaged in the conversation, so hopefully I can do it justice. So if you could move to the presentation, I would greatly appreciate that. I'm not seeing the presentation.
Give us just one moment.
Okay. All right. So a lot of good progress, collaboration, discussions have been happening with DART, as we've mentioned in previous conversations. I'm here today to kind of present an overview of where we are with the potential interlocal agreement for joint rail operations. The best way to kind of think about this project would be in 3 phases, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. We've been hesitant to share too much because there's a lot of moving parts with regard to DART. They have the D2 project that they have going on. The Silver Line is going through some assessment as far as budget and timeline. So what they're looking to achieve in their phase 1, phase 2 has been in flux. That has been reviewed fairly extensively by DART. It was just recently in the last handful of days that they came back with a proposed set of topics to discuss here. So I'm going to walk you through those. So DART's looking to locate an equipment maintenance facility. They've done quite a bit of exploratory review along the Silver Line. They looked at their facility down at the TRE south of the airport. As you recall, I've communicated in the past that we facilitated some conversations with DART about coming up to Louisville because we're in close proximity to the Silver Line, and those conversations have continued to move forward. These are excerpts, by the way, from the draft ILA that I received from DART. I wanted them to kind of put in writing what their desires were before our board really had an opportunity to kind of look at what they're proposing, just to make sure that I wasn't bringing stuff to the board and then it constantly changing. So this is kind of where we are today. They desire to enter into an agreement with us to perform joint operations out of our DCTA operating facility here in Louisville. Basically what they're looking for is for us to accommodate their Silverline operations. So it would ultimately become a joint operations facility. I'll walk you through some of the details of that. And ultimately that we would look to have an optimized service delivery strategy that would be more regionally focused, where we'd have both DART and DCTA being operated out of the same facility, hopefully in the future, joint operations, dispatch, and things of that nature, so that we could share cost and operate a more efficient regional solution. Next slide, please. So these are bullets straight out of the proposed ILA. Phase one is really focusing on the planning and designing and the construction of a temporary facility. DART really needs a place to receive their vehicles. They have 8 Stadler Flirt vehicles, DMUs, that are coming mid 2022. So it's a very short time frame. We've had some preliminary engineering discussions with DART. They've had some of their folks come out and take a look at our site. Everyone's fairly confident that while it's a tight timeline, that we could erect a tent facility on the north end of our existing facility and leverage some of the track. There would be some track work that would be required, but they really need a place to not only receive the vehicles, because they'll come in sections, they have to be offloaded off of a truck, put onto the track, assembled, and then they would start testing and commissioning of the vehicles. That's probably a 2 to 3 year process in what they would need for from DCTA as far as testing and commissioning, because it's not only the vehicles, it's getting operators used to the service and so on. So the initial phase really would be to deliver for the testing and commissioning, accommodate the storage of maintenance and repair equipment and materials, and basically do all things necessary to upgrade our facility to support DART's commissioning and testing services. Next slide. So phase one would be to develop the temporary facility by 2022. That would include test site, track upgrades, commissioning, temporary maintenance. Phase two would be a commitment to actually house DART long-term. So phase one could easily be accomplished separate from phase two or phase three. It would support DART's immediate needs to commission the vehicles. But it's my understanding from the leadership to the very top, the CEO, interim CEO, that DART is not looking at any other facility at this point, that they're committing and very interested in working with DCTA to create a regional joint operating facility. And that discussion really moves us into phase two and phase three. Phase two, the focus of that would be predominantly extensions of our existing facility. Now, our facility was originally built with the design feature to extend to the south end of the existing facility. Major modifications would need to happen in order to house not only DART's vehicles, but their maintenance team and staff. So imagine almost doubling the size, adding 20,000 square feet to the existing facility southward. And then a portion of that discussion would also include what upgrades are required to the track south. I'll get into that in a few minutes. There's an option to upgrade it just to class, or what's called class 2 track, which basically determines the operating speed and what level of technology that's required on the track. And really, in order for DART to operate at our facility, all they would need to do is upgrade to a class 2 track. But there's opportunities with DCTA and DART, as well as the timing of the Silver Line, to actually upgrade that to track 4. And I'll get into that later in this presentation. And then ultimately, phase 3 of the project would assume that that class 4 upgrade gets done, and then DCTA either locate a facility platform, if you will, at the terminus of the Silver Line where it comes into the Carrollton Station. And I'll walk you through a little bit more of that, kind of some of the initial planning around that. So next slide, please. So one of the I guess biggest issues for DCTA and this board to consider is, because it's our facility, we own the land, we own the building, we have the rights up to Trinity Mills. DART's desire is that for DCTA to take on the design, engineering, and construction of the line between our facility. So phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, their request is that DCTA take on that responsibility. No obligations have been made, no commitments. I haven't even said that we would do it, said that we would entertain it, that I would bring it back to the board for conversation. But their desire is for DCTA to take on the responsibility of delivering phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, so that they can focus on the Silver Line and D2 and other projects that they have going on. Now, these discussions have been vetted through the leadership team to the highest levels of their design, engineering, construction department for the Silver Line. And I think on both sides, we feel like while it's a big lift for DCTA, the intent would be that we would go out and if we desire to do this, that we would go out and contract for these services, that we wouldn't necessarily hire direct staff for these types of services. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, phase 1 is to build a temporary facility. They'd like to have it in place by April of 2022. This basically is a 15,000 square foot tent on the north end. There would be some track work to extend our existing track north, just to give them a straight line shot into the facility. They contemplated relocation of some of our bus fleet, but what we're doing with VIA would likely give us the room that we need. I don't believe that there'd be a lot of yard changes that would be needed for our fleets to coexist. And I believe that there's plenty of room to accommodate a lay down yard and commissioning for their vehicles. There would be a bit of grading, drainage, and utility work that's necessary. But I believe both DART and DCTA have looked at the size of the project and feel fairly comfortably that we could accommodate DART and meet this deadline. Next slide. So some of the responsibilities, DART agrees to provide DCTA with an approved scope of work for each of the elements, that they would use their best efforts to review and approve all the deliverables. We would, they would fund all the design, engineering, construction, project management, and support services from DCTA to meet their needs for phase 1 and the majority of phase 2. I'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide, please. And they'd reimburse us for managing the design, the construction contracts, and of course, any facility reimbursables. We would agree to a lease fee once we understand exactly how many folks they're going to have there. They would share in utility costs. So a lot of benefits, I think, for DCTA as well, because we get kind of economies of scale. We get to use our existing facility. We get to offset some of our existing costs. So that's been agreed to. How we bill that would likely be monthly. And so next slide, please. We'd have to agree to kind of follow not only DCTA's, but DART's rules for design, engineering, construction. That shouldn't be an issue. We both follow FTA federal guidelines, very similar contracting requirements that are in place. And we would collaborate and as much as possible around the integration of the A train downtown Carrollton station. We've had quite a few conversations about that, and I'll get into that in the next couple of slides. Next, please. Oh, so here we go. So the area that we're contemplating is from Training Mills to the Cotton Belt Station, or the Silver Line. It's roughly 2.2 miles. So currently we deliver, we stop at the Training Mills Station. There's track that already exists in between Training Mills and the Cotton Belt. And for just to kind of ground the conversation, back in June of 2019, we commissioned our engineering team, who also helped build the A-Train system. So they're very familiar with the Cotton Belt already. They've done a lot of work with DART over the past years, very familiar with this segment. And we commissioned them to do some design takeoffs. So for orientation, at the top in green is where our station is contemplated. The orange, depending on the color of your screen, it might be red, is the Cotton Belt, or existing concept for where the DART Cotton Belt station would be. In yellow is the adjoining platform. I'll show that in a little bit more fidelity in a second. And then you have the DART light rail station that is grade separated. It's up basically it's up in the air. There's an elevator escalator that allows folks that are getting on and off the light rail system to get down to the Cotton Belt station. And then again, the yellow is what's contemplated as joint pedestrian walkways that integrate the light rail system, the Silver Line, and the proposed DART A-Train station. So next slide, please. In a little bit more fidelity, what was discussed and contemplated with DART and just recently as we reviewed this plan. So you can see a phase 1, phase 2, those would be the platforms for DCTA. There's been no agreement as to the timing. A lot of this has to do with budget and
Collection of data detected.
and other things. So the general concept was that we would initially start out with one track or one platform on a single track in phase 1, which would be adjacent to the shared platform. And then at a later date that we would come in with an additional platform. Part of that was just contemplated around budget because it would cost more to do. And then there was some additional work that needed to be done around planning with regard to a trail that is contemplated in the area, also sidewalk, and just how much room there is between North Broadway, College Street, and it would likely take some redesign of the sidewalk. It's currently, I believe, 10 feet wide, and that would have to be narrowed down if we're planning to put a second platform there. In yellow, as you can see, just right off the end of our platform, there's contemplated an elevator bank, if you will. So if you notice these columns are actually the columns that are above us, which is where the DART green line currently traverses. So there's enough room underneath that column, underneath the railway, to put in our station. But as you can see, this crosswalk, this area over here is an apartment or a development, housing development. So it's contemplated that this would be the crosswalk from that development and other transit-oriented development onto the shared platform. But as I'll show in the next slide, there's a contemplation of a rail or trail that's going to come through the area that created a little bit of conflict, but I believe we have walked through that. So next slide. This is called the Vila Web Hike and Bike Trail that's being funded and sponsored by the COG. If you'll go to the next slide, you'll note that the idea was that it would come by this development and across the street literally right over the top of where our current platform design was. If you'll go to the next slide, you'll see how they kind of overlap here. Discussions a few weeks ago was to have Archer Western, the design and construction team, to consider realigning this to where it comes closer to the Cotton Belt and then traverse in this direction. I believe that's the general consensus and how that would work. I wanted to highlight a couple of things. So this is where all of our effort had been placed, and it makes sense because this is a Silver Line. This is in close proximity to the DART light rail station, the Cotton Belt station, where they would contemplate a future rail line that's coming from Irving. It's on the Medill corridor. And of course, we would have the ability to continue south in the future under a regional design. But one of the things that we want to make sure of, because there had been requests or comments made from previous board members about the concept of being able to get to the airport or to share the ability to share the Silver Line corridor. Now, a lot of work would still need to be done around modeling and making sure that there's enough time, and how we would integrate vehicles from DCTA, assuming that this became a regional system. Is there the opportunity to integrate or interline, if you will, the systems? So currently there is a spur track, and this is a spur track here along this line, and it's probably about a half a mile down where it traverses and connects to the DART Cotton Belt system, the Silver Line. So what would be required in order to go to the airport, assuming that all of this was regionally connected, we would traverse that spur, go down about a half a mile or so, and then have to do what's called a reverse move, which would be to put in reverse and then go towards the airport. One of the things that we want to make sure of is that as land development happens, we wanted to ensure that while we're looking at the design as regional partners, if we are actually operating our systems as in a partnership, is there something more elegant that could happen in the future, not necessarily now, but in the future, that would inform land use and actually potentially change our decision making? Now, I think this still makes the most sense to come in here because of the coordination. But there is an opportunity in the future. We've had the conversation with DART. They've done no engineering or design. And by the way, these slides that I'm sharing were complement of DART. So they've already done a lot of this initial design and through conversations that we've had with them. But if we decided that we wanted to have an interline service going to Plano, Frisco, Shiloh Road, which is where the terminus, I believe, of the Silver Line is planned, is there a way to provide commuter service, one seat ride, and to get onto the Silver Line service? A lot of caveats to that, but could this be moved either here or eventually brought down to connect into this area? This is currently a private entity. It's a lumberyard. I'm sorry, was there a question?
No, so this is about discussion. So I guess at what point do we need to, as staff, are you going to need some direction, or are you just going to need some feedback?
Yes. I just wanted to give an update on the station location, because I think it's important to understand, to bring context to the ILA, because these are the three phases. And I just wanted to point out that we just wanted to look at the feasibility of this potential station. It's not something that we're contemplating in the 3 phases of the ILA, but we wanted to make sure that we looked at it.
Okay, so the maybe not the pressing is not the right word, but really the immediate issue is the ILA.
The immediate issue is ILA, correct.
Okay, so what are you needing from the board on that? It says discuss potential agreement Doesn't say anything about executing anything, or are you just needing board feedback on, do you want to move forward with this?
Yes, so this month was to provide some of the details of the ILA. I wanted to
Okay.
show the board those particular items that are drafted. I believe DART is going to ask DCTA to take action soon so that we can move forward at least on phase 1 of the ILA, if it's the desire of the board to continue to move in this direction.
Sure.
And so next month we would be bringing back a draft ILA of the 3 phases.
Okay.
There was some initial budgetary numbers that DART had put together for build out of phase 1 and phase 2. We're hopeful that we can share those. They've been modified slightly because of their timing on their system, but we should be able to define those with more granularity. And the intent of the ILA would be to have at least wording in there that both agencies intend. Obviously, phase 1 would be in more detail and fidelity, because we would be committing to do this on behalf of DART to support their phase 1 commissioning and testing. And then there would be language in the ILA to address phase 2 and phase 3. But I wanted the board to understand these different phases, because in phase 3, it contemplates class 4 upgrade, and that's where DCTA would then be looking at potentially putting in funding to support the upgrade of that track. So we'll bring that back to the board next month to get a little bit more detail. At some point, DCTA is going to have to get our engineering firm, LAN, to do some estimates so that we have a better feel for what we think the preliminary cost will be.
Sure.
And then lastly, I believe we have a wonderful opportunity with this collaborative effort between DART and DCTA to go look for additional funding to help upgrade the track from class 2 to class 4. So when we originally talked about this back in 2019, the cost estimate for DCTA alone was fairly significant. By working with DART, and if you can go to the last slide, please. It kind of encapsulates some of the challenges. So this is basically a track line chart. There's some of the questions that still need to be vetted out between DART and DCTA, and whether or not we can get it to class 4. Class 4 is basically what would be required in order for DCTA to operate revenue service. Class 2 would allow DART to get their trains back and forth from our yard to the Silver Line, but it wouldn't be at operating speeds to support revenue service. So DCTA's opportunity is to collaborate with DART, because they already had money to upgrade the class the track from class 1 to class 2. If we work with DART and if we're to take on those responsibilities for upgrading the track, then I think our incremental costs are much lower, and then it affords the ability for DCTA to start operating revenue service much sooner and probably at a lower cost. And if there's consensus around that, then we can go to the COG or compete for federal dollars to do that additional track upgrade to lower the expense for DCTA.
And you're saying that's part of the ILA?
It would be part of the ILA. That I don't think it would be anything that commits the 2 entities to do it, but we want to have language in there, because as you know, we've had access impact fees. We have a lot of things that we do with DART today. Sure. That this would, I believe, bring DCTA in strong regional partnership. Leading the implementation of this project would make sense from that perspective. Certainly add some challenge, because we'd have to procure the services, but it's not something that DCTA is unfamiliar with, since we built the rail line ourselves. So
okay,
that's the presentation at this point. I'm happy.
Let me open it up for any discussion with the board. It seems like that really what staff is needing is just some discussion and potential direction on the ILA.
Right.
And so if we could focus our comments on that, the other regional partnership opportunities are certainly discussions we want to have in the future, but I think they're far enough out that we can limit our discussion to the ILA direction and comments. So any comments or questions on that?
Chair Watts, TJ.
Yes. Yes.
Just I want to make sure I'm going to make sure I understand this. First, I love the idea of working with DART. I think it's great. I really appreciate the opportunity that they're giving us. By signing this, will we be giving up some potential leverage for getting a station down there on the Cotton Belt? Is there a way that we can create a hook in there somewhere to ensure that we will have a space down there? I love the idea of a single seat, but I don't think that's possible because we would have to completely rebuild. My understanding, we have to rebuild our stations and get different vehicles.
No, actually, the stations would accommodate the service.
My understanding is
you're
that
absolutely
the height
correct.
is different on the DART trains than they are on ours.
From what I understand from Stadler, they're not. They would work. So that's the good news, is that we'd still have to do a little bit of engineering, but I don't think so. I think we're in pretty good shape. That actually DART could stop at Hebron Station.
And that's, I think we're going down a rabbit hole on that one. Just is there an opportunity to put a hook or a negotiation point to ensure that we get one of the two options that are down there, or three?
Yes, and that would be the intent of having that language in the ILA.
Okay.
Why we would put phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 in the ILA, that there would be intent to execute that. And I believe that it's been vetted with some of the board members from DART. I think there's genuine interest in DCTA getting down there. It's been, originally we were thinking it would be 10 or 15 years, but when DART accelerated the Silver Line, it's created a great opportunity for us to get down there.
No, as long as there's a way to make that a little bit stickier, maybe get a little more momentum on it, I'm fine with that. I also think it's good that we have the option to move to class 4 without having to go ask them again.
Yes, thank you.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Okay.
Chair Watts,
Yes, go ahead.
I see Connie White has her hand up.
All right, Connie.
Thank you. This is really a nit, but I noticed in your description of our responsibilities, it talks about providing on the first of the month all of the billing for the prior month, and I don't think that's reasonable. And I wouldn't want us to get caught in a situation where we're not fulfilling the contract because we didn't provide it in time. But to provide on the first of the month through the last of the following month is just not a reason. I don't think it's reasonable.
And we'll work on the wording of the ILA. I wanted to share the intent from DART and not really change a lot of the words, but we'll have to work on several of the paragraphs that are in there. And they're expecting that. I wanted to share it with the board when I thought it was reasonable to share, and I felt like some of the moving parts had settled down, and I believe we're there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
Raymond, just something that's back of my mind would be tying this, if possible, to the renewal of our lease on our rail.
Okay.
Just a thought process. In other words, we don't want to build things for them that they will then take over when our lease terminates. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I believe by tying these phases into the existing interlocal agreement with DART, it opens up some conversation with DART about that whole concept of access impact fees, and they benefit from our facility. We jointly pay for it. At some point, you have to ask the question, why are we charging each other for things that we should be doing regionally? But I completely agree. I think that's a conversation that needs to happen as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. That's just an observation. Appreciate it.
Well, and I agree with both Board Member Burke and Board Member Gilmore that this is something that DART is asking for us that's going to be very beneficial to them. And I want to make sure that I understand the benefits to DCTA, and not just kind of an intention later on, but what is it that we're actually exchanging in value to meet each other's interests. And so I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of, especially if we're going to be designing the project, constructing the project, and doing all these things, what is it that DCTA is going to be leveraging our willingness to do that and to provide this for them? What are we getting? And I'm not quite sure that I've heard what we would like to ask for. I've heard what sort of our intentions are. I've heard what DART's intentions are, and I think we enjoy a better relationship with DART than we have in the past. But I also want to make sure that we're very clear on what we want to ask for in return. Because we might only get 1 or 2 shots at this as far as really making it something that's negotiable and bindable. And I want to make sure that we don't miss that opportunity.
Agreed. Thank you for that input.
Yep. All right. Any
Chair
other
Watts?
comment? Yes, go ahead.
I believe Ms. Costa has unmuted.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say this has been a discussion going on for over a year. This was not actually DART's first choice. I think that because of the desire of COG for the agencies to work together, that all believed this was the best choice. And so certainly the discussions have been how it truly benefits both of us. So just want to say it's been a long discussion. It was not necessarily their first choice, but we all recognized it was the best choice. And so I think they know clearly where we stand on this.
And I appreciate that comment. So I guess for me, it's understanding what are the factors that make this the best choice and also make it the best choice for DCTA. So there may be some conversations behind the scenes that have articulated and identified those. I don't know if they've floated to the top here, at least from my perspective, and I'm new here in the sense of just on the board a couple of years. So I want to understand the evolution of, okay, this might not be their first choice. It's the best choice because it meets DART's interests and it also meets DCTA's interests and it meets COG's interests with this desire for regional connectivity. And that's probably just a bullet point memo, quite frankly. So no, I appreciate that comment.
I do too. It's a very good point, and we'll work on bringing that back to the board. Thank you.
You bet. All right, we'll move on then to agenda item 7, discuss agency Title VI program updates process.
I'm going to ask Athena Forster, our AVP of Regulatory Compliance, to talk about this item.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'll make this really short. We are required as a recipient of federal dollars to have a Title VI program. We have to update that program every 3 years. Our last update was in 19, so we are 2 years in and need to begin working on our next update to have it submitted to FTA by July 1 of 22. With all of the service changes that we are discussing and ready to implement with VIA, this will could possibly have a major impact on our Title VI, and we have to therefore do all of the analysis, which we are engaging help to do that for us currently with all the changes going on with VIA. So just wanted to bring it to the board's attention, get it on the agenda. Depending on exactly what all we have to update, we may need to get some outside help to get this updated due to the workload on staff. And it involves all the demographics, census information, and lots of different things. So we wanted to just make you aware that we may be coming back to the board in May or the June timeframe to bring a consultant on board to help us get our program ready and ready to be submitted to FTA in next year. So I will be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions? All right. Hearing none. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on then to agenda item number 8, which is discuss Highland Village Enhanced Local Assistance Program funds, ELAP funds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, well, back in the days, this was the ELAP, not the TRIP. It was the Enhanced Local Assistance Program, and which Highland Village received funds. And in the spirit of transparency and accountability, we have particular funds that we want to bring to the board that we've had in our possession. But I'm going to ask our CFO, Ken Heerman of the City of Highland Village, who was around then and is still around, to kind of give some back information of where we are on this. Ken? Uh-oh. Let's see.
Are we missing someone?
We do see him logged in.
I do
He might have
not.
just stepped away.
Oh, no, so let's see.
Mayor Wilcox is on. I don't know if she would have anything to add.
So let's go to, so Marissa, are you available?
I am available.
Chairman Watts?
Ken Heerman.
Oh, there it is. I think he's on.
Ken.
Yep, sorry, I had to, oh, hello, sorry, I had to call in.
Yes, okay, you sure, go ahead.
Oh, I just give you a quick summary. We received, well, I appreciate you, your consideration of this. I'm getting a little feedback on my computer. Let me turn this down. Well, previously we received DLAP funds and we had some identified uses for that, and they didn't really work out. It was initially for a bus station, and then we ended up not doing that as part of a development on 407. And then that was repurposed to purchase of a couple buses, which we did accomplish, and we had remaining funds of roughly $29,000. And we repurposed that to look for a trail connection across Coppers Lake through our Doubletree Ranch to connect to the DCT, well, the Highland Village Louisville train station. As part of the I-35 project, use of our Coppers Park location, remediation of that provided for, in essence, TxDOT to actually build that trail section for us. And so the funds really weren't necessary for that. And so at that time, a good bit of time had transpired and we had some turnover, and as well as some DCTA staff turnover. And basically they just kind of got pushed to the side and sat there for a while, and we didn't really have an identified use. But with the reestablishment of the TRIP program, we have a perfect project for that. And we thought this would be an opportune time, if would be allowed by the board, to actually repurpose that money to the project that we will propose to partially fund that. And we certainly realize, according to the contract, that we're outside of that window, so it would just be a request to honor our original intent of trying to get the funds used appropriately. So that's kind of the long and short of that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure.
So I think what Highland Village was looking at was to use the ELAP funds, as well as what we're requesting for the TRIP, for a project adjacent, a trail connection adjacent to the Highland Village Road.
Okay, a couple of questions on that. So then the original ELAP program, what were the, I don't know if, I don't like the word rules, but what were the bylaws that if there's money left over, were the cities able to petition the board to use them for something else, or were they asked to be returned, or were they required to be? I mean, what was the status back then when those funds were issued? What was the status of the regulation? Do we know?
I think, Chair, I think I was reading the same, I was looking around, I read in the policies that the cities were supposed to return it back to the authority, and the authority put it back into an account for that city.
Okay.
So it sounds like it's I mean, from a county point of view, that they just send us back a check, we credit it to their trip program, and we send them a new check back to them for what they want to do. That's just, it's a lot of check writing, but I mean, I went through this when I was a DART. We had extra money, we had to send them a check back, and then we send them a new program request, and they send us the money right back. It's an accounting thing.
Yeah, Marissa's done a great job, forensic accountant hat she put on and went back, I think, before most of us were even here. And it does look like the money wound up in Highland Village's account. The money theoretically should have been returned back then, but it wasn't. So I think that's exactly right. That it's a matter of how we allocate the funds, but I'll turn it over to Marissa if she has anything to add.
Sure. I mean, we did locate, I think Christina is the only staff member that was maybe an employee of DCTA at the time of all of this. I did find in our July 2010 board packet that Highland Village, there was an ELAP report from Highland Village at that board meeting discussing the remaining 29 million. And they had wanted to use that for a study.
29,000.
9,000, not 29.
29,000, I'm sorry.
We'll take it.
And so that's the last board communication that I could find in any of our board meeting files. And so I think, to Ken's point, Highland Village, determined that study wasn't what they wanted to do with those funds, and those funds have just kind of been set aside by Highland Village. And so now they're asking the board for approval to combine those funds again with the new trip funds.
Chair Watts?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hold on,
Aye.
please. Hold on,
Christina.
please. Okay, this is not an action item.
Okay.
In Marissa's memo, it mentioned a potential action, but I think after some further discussion, it was decided this just needed to be a discussion item, and then for us to bring it back to the next board meeting as an action item. Sorry.
Super.
Yeah, no, my mistake as well. I apologize.
Okay, so we will have it on the consent agenda for the May board meeting.
That would be lovely.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, board members.
You bet.
Thank you all.
Agenda item number 9 is discuss and receive an update on Texas Motor Speedway shuttle. Now, this is going to be, I hope, an abbreviated discussion, because I understand that they are terminating that service in, I guess it's a week or two. I don't remember, in middle of May or something like that. So
That
anyway.
is correct. I'll make it brief. Thank you for that. We were asked by the county to provide this service. I mentioned that in our briefing on March 10th.
Yep.
The service has been, I think, very good for the region. We've had a lot of positive feedback on it. A request was made to identify what our costs were. Marissa, if you could just quickly share what our findings were for March, that would be great.
Sure. So our March costs were roughly $26,000 related to the TMS shuttle. In mid-April, we reduced the number of shuttle trips per day that we are offering, and the number of days per week that we are offering the shuttle. So we anticipate April costs to be less than $20,000. And then, Mayor, as you mentioned, the county has plans to spin down the clinic by mid-May, so we would expect May's costs to be even less. So in total, maybe $60,000 is what we're looking at over DCTA's commitment from end of February through May. And as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, we will be pursuing FEMA funding through Denton County, and any additional costs associated that are not eligible for FEMA funding can be reimbursable by CARES Act funding.
And that's it, unless there's questions.
Any questions? All right, fantastic. We'll move on then to agenda item number 10, discuss local and regional transportation update and legislative issues. I don't have anything. Any staff or Raymond or Lindsay, anybody have any updates on any issues that are important to the agency?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do have a short briefing from Rick Dennis with Hilco, our legislative consultant down in Austin. Hilco's been monitoring all of the activity going on at the state legislature. So in addition to the regular briefings we've been providing in the board packets, each month we also wanted to provide a quick briefing today. So with that, I will pass on to Rick.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, Chairman and members of the board. It's a great privilege to be with y'all today. I understand I'm at the end of the day, so I will be brief. We have 40 days left in this legislative session. The big news today is that the budget is on the House floor. So the House members will be going through probably more than 100 amendments today as they try to craft the 2-year spending plan. Currently, we are tracking 90 priority items on the DCTA bill track. Those are 90 Senate bills and House bills, some of which, though, are identical companions, so it's not 90 unique bills. 4 of those do have specific references to the enabling statute that created the Denton County Transportation Authority. So we are obviously watching those 4 very closely. We've been communicating with staff, vetting all 4 to make sure that there's not any problems with the way the bills are worded. The summary memo that you were provided gives a short summary of what each of those 4 bills proposes to do. However, I would be happy to answer any questions on any of those measures that the board may have. But broadly here, this legislative session, we've got some good old-fashioned House versus Senate fights that are brewing on some topics, one of which is constitutional carry of firearms. The House has endorsed it. The Senate has said, I'm not really sure. We also have some good old-fashioned Republican versus Democrat fights that are brewing, but some other issues that, of course, we're keeping a very close eye on the authority's behalf, one of which is taxpayer-funded lobbying. To date, the Senate version of that bill, which prohibits municipalities and counties only from having taxpayer-funded lobbyists, it's over in the Senate. The House version is sitting in the State Affairs Committee, where it's been for about a month since its committee hearing. And the speculation is that the bill author and the chair of the committee, who voted against this measure last session, worth noting, are trying to work out some kind of compromise language that would allow the bill author to pass something but not completely prohibit political subdivisions from having a voice in Austin. We're also, of course, just watching and monitoring very closely the destination sales tax legislation. Representative Morgan Meyer, I should actually say Chairman Morgan Meyer, is trying to send a bill to the House floor that would completely alter the comptroller's rules on this topic that the comptroller recently adopted and is actually in the process of implementing. So that is one that we are watching very closely on y'all's behalf. Other than that, as far as the delegation members that are going to make up the Denton County Transportation Authority, we'll likely have to wait until October to know that, because it's going to take a special session on redistricting due to the delayed data. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I promised you I would be brief at the end. Since I'm at the end of the day, I would be happy to take any questions as to what's been going on in Austin so far.
Any questions? Comments? Thank you.
As always, it's a pleasure.
You bet. Thank you, sir. All right, we'll move on then to, I believe we're on now informational reports. And I believe these are reports that if the board had, I don't believe these are necessarily specific presentations, but if the board has any questions, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, I'm looking at the, anybody have any questions or comments on any of the informational reports? I've just got one. And that's on the one for the third one, Route 3 and Route 7 survey data. And this was the survey data to try to determine who's riding routes 3 and 7. Is that correct?
Correct. So we had discussed staff's intent to kind of bring in a survey company in order to do some very specific and pinpointed more of a deep dive data collection closer to the launch of VIA. But we had discussed a couple board meetings ago about what would be the potential that NTMC staff could start to collect some preliminary data, although not at the detail which we had planned to moving forward. And so this is just that preliminary data that NTMC was able to accommodate as part of that request. But we still intend to have our brand ambassador services or a survey service go out and get more specific detailed survey data to share with the board.
So then help me understand, when I'm looking at the table on page 323 of the packet.
Yes, sir.
And I see the dates. So this data was it collected manually just by the drivers?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And, you know, when you look at Route 7, so when I see overall Route 7 and UNT Route 7, that's just saying these are how many of these people were students.
Correct.
UNT.
So in the overall column is the total ridership reported for that route. In the UNT column are the number of manual marks that the driver tracked if someone utilized a UNT ID to access that service. So it could be students, faculty, or staff.
So I can understand what the numbers mean. When I see, let's just say the first one, under overall, it's 168. Does that mean somebody got on and somebody got off and that's 2? Or is it a specific person?
On the bus, we only track the onboarding. So
okay,
you
so
could
it's 100. Okay, so it's people getting on 168 times, and so
correct. So it would be 168 trips. We don't know if it was the same individual who took several trips throughout the day.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting. I mean, it looks like on Route 7. You're looking at a quarter to a third, except on certain days, are UNT affiliated riders. Whereas on Route 3, it's very minimal, except on Saturday, April the 10th. Do we have any idea what was happening on Saturday, April the 10th?
You know, you asked that. I asked the very same question. And I have done some research and I cannot find like any sort of an event or an activity that would have caused that sort of an increase in ridership on that Saturday.
Okay. All right. Well, this is so. But what you're saying is we're still going to engage someone to do a more formal kind of accurate. I say accurate, not that I'm calling into question the accuracy of this, but something. But this is good data. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And NTMC is going to continue to collect this data. So expect to see this report ongoing. We'll just continue the trend chart so that you can see. We would have called out some trends, but we felt with only 2 weeks worth of data, we really kind of needed a few more weeks of data to kind of pull anything out that was long-standing. But we'll continue to include this in the board packet. And then we'll brief the board when we have a plan for the more in-depth data request.
And I would expect those numbers to significantly change once UNT comes back on campus. I believe they're planning to do that this fall, assuming COVID stays in check. We continue to trend in the positive direction, but it's likely that those numbers would skew even higher with UNT.
Yeah.
And I think too, it's important to note that their summer service starts May 2nd. So you'll see a decline before you see that increase.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I would love in the fall to see the comparison.
Sure, we will just continue this chart.
Numbers. Yeah.
Absolutely. We'll just continue this chart so that you have access to this data every single month.
Thank you.
And I will say that ridership has been trending up a few percentage points. We haven't seen overall, we haven't seen a huge change yet, but as we're all seeing on the highways, there's more cars there. As the counties and the regions start feeling more comfortable and getting people back to work in offices, because that's probably the biggest driver of transit services. And when people are going back to work as they originally did, that we would see a significant increase in ridership. But the encouraging thing is that we are seeing the trend upward across the board slightly.
Okay. Any other comments on this or any of the other informational reports? All right, then we'll move on to future agenda item and board member requests. Any comments or questions on future agenda items and board member requests? Board members, any requests?
I'm in good shape.
Okay. Then we'll move on to reports on items of community interest.
I'm sorry, Chair
Did
Watts, I
I
believe.
miss something? I'm sorry. Yes.
Ms. Costa has her hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
No. This is, we're on the right item. This is items of community interest. So just to remind everyone that this Saturday is Celebrate Trails Day, and we're hosting the event. The train will be free to everyone if they use the code Celebrate Trails Day at the DDTC from 9 to 12. They'll be providing snacks and water and a printed copy of the new Rail Trail Pocket Guide. There'll also be a scavenger hunt with prizes. And this will be conducted, as always, with the requirement of masks and distance. I just wanted to remind and let the public know to come and see us on the trails.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Go ahead.
If I could add, just as a reminder to the public, that we are in the open public involvement process time period for the public to provide feedback on the GoZone on-demand rideshare service. You can access all details about the service at dctafeedback.net. There are not only interactive portals on there for you to explore the service and provide detailed feedback, but you can also access a list of online and in-person events to attend if you'd prefer to speak directly to a DCTA employee. And we're also happy to schedule meetings with organizations, presentations of that nature, and all of that contact information is on that website as well.
Okay.
And I would like to add that we have been nominated as a finalist for Business of the Year by the Louisville Chamber of Commerce. Tomorrow I'll be doing a short video in case we are selected. But just wanted to let everyone know that. It's a great honor.
Okay. And Chair Watts, just to wrap this up on behalf of Christina, since she does not have much of a voice left, I just want to remind our member cities that the TRIP annual call for project submittal deadline is coming up on May 1st. We did send reminders to member city staff, and all of that information needs to be sent to Tim Palermo. And so all of that is in that email that was shared.
Okay, that's good information. Thank you. Anything else? All right, then our next agenda item is convene an executive session. The board may convene the regular board meeting or will convene the board or adjourn the regular board meeting and move into closed session at 1:41. And I'll call the items, and then once we're ready, and go into the split out rooms, we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back. So the board may convene the regular board meeting to closed session for 2 agenda items as authorized by section 551.071. 2, the Texas Government Code, Board of Directors meeting may be convened in closed executive session for the purposes of seeking confidential legal advice from the general counsel on any agenda item. So if there's anything that anybody has on that, we'll address that. And then agenda item B is authorized by section 551.074. The Texas Government Code, the Board of Directors may convene in closed session for the purposes of discussing the duties and evaluations of the Chief Executive Officer. So in the beginning, once we get to B, I want to limit that to board members, and then we can invite people in as the board decides to hear from them as well. So we'll go ahead. I'm not sure, being Zoomed, do we go into breakout rooms or how does that work? How do we do this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just to confirm, so for item number 2 and for actually item number 1 as well, on executive session, we will move over our the board members as well as board member alternates, and that is board, I'm sorry, not board officers, that's in TMC, our executive team and Joe Gorfita for item number 1, and then we would remove our staff for item number 2. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Deborah, can I go ahead and ask this and make this easy? Since we've already addressed all the items on the agenda, is there any legal questions as it relates to any agenda items that need to be discussed under A, and we can just do B?
Yeah, any questions for legal staff on any agenda items that we've discussed? Thank you, Joe.
Yep.
Seeing none, then we'll move, we'll just go straight to agenda item B.
We will, we've got the executive session room set up, so we will start migrating everybody over. So if you'll just give us a moment, we will start doing that.
Lindsay, just to confirm, it's board members only, and you want to start this, Chairman, in 5 minutes?
Yeah, we'll start it in 5 minutes, and then the board can, we can talk about inviting people in after we've had our discussion. Yes, absolutely.
So go ahead and move over, pause for 5 minutes, then start. Is that what you're looking for?
Say that one more time.
I just want to make sure that folks, are you requesting that everybody get moved over now and then take a 5-minute recess and then start? Or do you want to wait 5 minutes before she moves you over?
Well, we'll just wait 5 minutes before she moves us over. It's 1:43. We'll go at 1:48. Yeah, can we do that? Can we do that, Joe?
Yeah, that's fine. And do you want me in there for this, or are you gonna?
No, not right now. No.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. All right. Then we'll come back at, it's 1:44. We'll come back at 1:50. Let's come back at 1:50. Okay, we got about a minute or so. Okay.
Back.
Good to see you, Cesar.
Yep.
Let's see, our Joe. You're on mute, Joe.
I'm not supposed to be in here, right? Or am I?
That's right. No, not yet, unless we have a question for you.
Okay, well, I don't know how to, well,
So just
So-
so everyone is aware, we're still in the open session, so we'll start moving everybody over now.
Oh, you're still doing all that.
Yeah, well,
okay.
because we're technically on break, so if you reconvene at what time is it?
I.
Q1, we will now move everybody over that needs to be into the executive session.
Okay.
Yes. So give us just one moment.
Sure.
And also, I just want to share with everybody, once you guys are in there, you have your conversation, when you are ready to come back into the main meeting area, there's a button in that room that will say leave breakout room. You'll click on that and you have two options, click breakout room or leave meeting. Do not click leave meeting. You'll want to click on leave breakout room. That will put you back into the main meeting area. And if we can, Joe, if you can be the last one to leave that way we can make sure everybody's back into the main meeting room all together and we would be ready to proceed back and open. You're on.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. One moment.
Sure.
And you may have a button to click to accept going into the room. Vice Chair Molina, you'll have a button to press. And Joe, if you are going in there, there should be a prompt there for you to go ahead and accept to move into
yeah,
the.
I'm not going in, so I didn't accept it.
Okay, Cesar. There we go. Okay, thank you.
Lindsay,
Yes, ma'am.
is there there's no action after this executive session, right?
If there is, it will be whenever they return. So if there's any decision made in executive session, as it relates to item B,
Yeah.
then they would reconvene and open to take any action.
Yeah, there should be no action the way that it's written.
Okay.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is what you're supposed to say, yes, correct.
Okay, there is no action out of executive session. And seeing no more agenda items, we will stand adjourned, I believe. Is that, I don't have the agenda in front of me, so.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you all very much.
Adjourned at 3:05.
Adjourned at 3:05. Thank you.